The Gathering Broadcast, bringing together some details, decks, and documentaries.
Hello, magicians, and welcome to the Deckumentary Podcast. This episode, we have a spirited conversation about Ghostbusters. I know, not my best joke. Less of a yay, more of a boo.
Boo. Boo.
I'm your resident deck builder, Stephen Thompson, hated amongst the masses. And with me is our co-ghost, Josh Poole.
They hated him for he spoke the truth.
And the next 2 hours is going to be like this.
It'll be dabbled through, as usual. And with us this episode, my good friend and member of the phan-dom, Jeff McAdam. I mean, they should probably, wouldn't that be a good name for like a Ghostbuster fan club?
I mean, fandom, but if it was like PHANDOM,
Or
like the fan club.
I was going to say, what if it was just PHANTOM? And then I realized that's just
the
phantom.
word phantom. Good. Off to a great start. Hello, Steve. How are you?
I'm great. I am fantastic. I can spell, so this is new. For those new to the show, probably not us.
I'm not new to the show.
I am rocking this right now. We will be discussing the topic for which we have also built a commander deck. This episode, if you haven't guessed already, we will be diving into the Ghostbusters franchise. If you do enjoy this kind of magic adjacent content, please let us know in the comments. And if you do want to like and subscribe, please like and subscribe. Before we jump into the topic, a little bit about the deck itself. So for the Ghostbusters deck, I chose King of the Oathbreakers. And the name of the deck. So King of the Oathbreakers. Jeff, are you familiar with Lord of the Rings?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's like the ghost that Aragorn gets to join them in their fight, and he has all the other ghosts, so all these ghosts fight. But the name of the deck is I Ain't Afraid of No Oath.
It's every time I get a little giggle. It's good.
Jeff is disappointed.
I do not get a giggle.
I ain't afraid of no oath.
Oh, now I get it. Now that you've sung it. Yeah.
Yeah. So why was this commander chosen?
For the pun.
For the
Primarily
pun.
for the
Mostly
pun,
a lot
right?
of for the
Almost
pun.
exclusively.
But it's also a spirit that cares about spirits. The ability of King O makes it difficult to interact with, thus forcing opponents to often have to work together to deal with the deck. So actually the other players become the Ghostbusters and you're the ghosts.
Because you had it originally as like as an arch enemy deck, where it was
and it's
like
still
way stronger than all the other decks, and it was everyone had to work together to defeat. That
I
one
actually
deck.
found that the first iteration was like I was like, I have to make sure this is a strong deck. I will say, King of the Oathbreakers is not like a super strong. If you look on EDH Rec, there's not a lot of decks for it. There's quite a few, but it's not a very strong deck, and that actually I find with Arch Enemy works fairly well because you have those powerful Arch Enemy cards. How do you guys say that?
Arc
Arch
enemy.
Enemy.
Ooh, Arc, I think.
Arch Enemy.
Arch enemy.
Now, you asked me, and I was like, well, obviously. And then my brain went like 50-50 on it.
Well, obviously, it's like both.
No.
Red pill, blue pill.
I've seen a band that refers to themselves as Arch Enemy.
Yeah.
A Swedish metal band. But
I mean, both sound fine. Arch Enemy.
Yeah, maybe this is truly
Archangel, Archangel doesn't work.
Ooh, good point.
So Archangel.
Yeah.
I'm going to go with Arch Enemy.
Arc.
Just on that basis alone.
We got there.
But if you watch the Venture Brothers,
Oh, great show.
they use that term arch nemesis quite a bit.
Oh, but
And they-
Arch Nemesis is a bit weird.
It is weird, but it also refers to like the act of being like the nemesis or the villain to a hero as arching
That's
in the show, not arcing.
Yeah, no, that's interesting.
But that's something
Arch
they
it
literally
is.
made up for a
Yeah,
cartoon. So
So it was originally built to be an Arch Enemy deck.
this has been Entomology Podcast.
Yeah, welcome to words. I'm so good with them. I find that because those big Arch Enemy cards add so much power to the deck that if you
just pick a lane.
Yeah. Well, actually, with the new set coming out, which new Halloween set, Duskmourn coming out, I wanted to do kind of a Ghosts episode for. That's another reason we built this one. But yeah, it's it's not a super powerful deck, but when you add the arc enemy to it, man, what have I done?
It really pushes it over to the.
It really does.
'cause I think the effect of King of the Oathbreakers is it's a powerful effect. Like the thing it does is very unique and very powerful within the like spirit cards.
Totally. And it is, that's a nice thing, is it's a very unique effect that it phases out all your spirits. But yeah, so that's why I went with King of the Oathbreakers. The main win strategy of the deck, it's again not necessarily to go wide. It's hard to go wide with the cards that currently exist. There's not a lot of good low costed spirit makers. There are some, but not as many as I'd like there to be. So I kind of ended up making it a bit of a Voltron-esque thing where you want to kill people slowly. There's a lot of deals. It's like a deal-making deck, which I thought kind of mirrored how Gozer had made deals with Ivo Shandor kind of thing, and Vigo made a deal with Janosch. So it's like this idea of like,
He is Vigo.
he is Vigo. Man, his voice is so good.
That's such a choice.
It is actually. I watched a documentary about how it was about Ghostbusters, but it talked about how he put a lot of time into creating that accent for it. His backstory was he was actually Carpathian historically, and that's kind of where the accent comes from, which Vigo was notoriously
Vigo
the Carpathian.
Apparently he was the only one.
Yeah, right.
Vigo the Carpathian.
The Carpathian, yeah. Not, less ominous if it was like Vigo, a Carpathian.
One of the
Vlad,
One of the millions of
Vlad, an impaler.
yeah, those are Tyler, a creator.
The difference between the and is
There's
vast.
a lot of work
Yeah.
here.
It's huge.
Now, Josh, I've played it a little bit, but you had a couple good games with the deck. What did you think?
Yeah, I think I played it 3 or 4 times. It's a really cool deck because it is that, like you mentioned, it's a cool hybrid of go wide and of sort of like it's a board-based strategy, but in a really unique way because King of the Oathbreaker's effect, if we didn't say it, is when he or any spirit is targeted, they phase out. And then I think he either creates the spirits when they come back in.
Yeah,
or, for the amount of spirits that phase out when they come back in, that same amount of spirits tapped spirits are created.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's essentially every time you target a spirit, for the amount you target, it doubles the amount of spirits that there are.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not very fast because phasing out takes a whole turn rotation.
Right.
But it makes your board really hard to interact with if you have the right amount of spells up.
Yeah.
So it's really resilient.
That's a good word for it.
And hard to deal with.
Yeah.
Which can lead to you kind of amassing, 3 spirits, 6 spirits, 12 spirits, and then it just kind of snowball and get really big. But it's black white, so you don't have fast mana, you don't have any of the stuff like that. So it's fair. I really enjoyed playing it. Just find it's just like 4 damage here, 8 damage here. You just kind of send like some amount of spirits at people through the game and ping people down, and there's
you
enough
have ways to have other people draw cards and
you
like
give
that too.
people other resources, stop yourself from being attacked through like propaganda effects or just tapping opponents' creatures down, and just sort of you're just there. You just kind of hang out.
Let's introduce the topic a little bit. Ghostbusters probably doesn't need too much introduction. It's such a enfranchised franchise.
It's been around.
Entrenched
just one of those.
franchise.
It's been around for so long. And
Yeah,
so iconic. So it exists in so many forms.
it really does, and we'll cover those forms as we go. So I have here the first spark that would eventually manifest itself into becoming the franchise was in 1981 in the mind of creator Dan Aykroyd of SNL fame. Aykroyd is spelled A-Y-K.
Aykroyd.
Oh, yeah, it's Aykroyd.
Aykroyd.
But anyways,
Yeah.
typing it is weird. Aykroyd, with a deep, deep history in the paranormal sciences, had read an article that blended ideas from parapsychology and quantum physics and thought that it would be an interesting idea to bring to the screen. Boy, was he ever right. From there, he would go on to help create one of the longest-running, most successful franchises of all time, from its first iteration released in 1984 to cartoons, toys, and the latest Ghostbuster movie, Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, this 40-year plus franchise has left fans ectogasming.
Really?
Wow.
Ectogasming.
Ectoplasm.
No, we get it.
No,
we
we
get it.
Oh,
got
I
there.
thought you didn't get
No,
it.
we
We
got there.
definitely get it.
We got there.
No.
Sorry, I came ill prepared. I thought we were talking about the 1975 live action children's show, Ghostbusters.
Excuse me.
Yep.
It's the
Ghostbusters.
Right.
Yeah, but they're two separate
The
words.
space ghost
Yeah,
space
that's
busters.
the one.
Yeah, and then they made the cartoon, The Ghostbusters.
Right.
Yes.
With Tracy the gorilla.
That's the one.
And
I loved Ghostbusters as a kid so much that I just watched that cartoon out for the exact reason that they made the cartoon,
didn't the
which was
car like have a face?
the car had a ghost in it,
It's very funny.
and
that
it talked to
there
them, and
was
it had a face on the
the
front.
the shared like for some
tho-
reason
for those
both
at home,
these two
this is
separate
not-
things.
The real Ghostbusters. This is not the cartoon based on the movie Ghostbusters. This was a different show that came out in the 70s that then they made a cartoon in the 80s called The Ghostbusters.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's a bit on this, but yeah, it
Yeah.
was the original thing called Ghostbusters.
Yeah.
And when the movie came out, the 1984 movie that we're talking about, that's the real thing that we're talking about. They went to use the name, and I guess nobody cared at the time, and then it was huge, and they wanted to make a cartoon and do all of this stuff, and then they were like, whoa, we still own the rights.
we
to
let you
this
guys use it for
as
this
like
one
a
movie.
kids thing, and so we're gonna make a cartoon called The Ghostbusters.
We
based on this
we'll get
1970s
into that a bit
yeah.
later, but yeah, there was some.
But I loved that cartoon as well. It's so weird.
It is very weird.
But
Um,
I just couldn't get enough Ghostbusters.
so I mean, we talked a little bit about our histories with the Ghostbusters, the other one, but I wanted to talk a bit about just like our relationship with the series. I don't personally remember seeing the original in theaters. I was probably too young. I was 4. Actually, I was 3 when it actually came out. But I do remember the cartoons and the toys quite a bit. The toys with they would have like this spaghetti
Yeah.
plastic that was the beam from
Yeah.
the blaster, and you could spin it on the back.
You spin the and it
Yeah.
just looked like it was the chaotic beams of
Yeah,
the
totally.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of where my beginnings with it happened. Josh, of course, different age bracket.
Yeah, so it much to your chagrin, I was -10 when the movie came out. So it came much later in my life. So I didn't watch. I actually just watched, at least consciously, the first Ghostbuster movie and the second one for the first time about a week-ish ago, I
Yeah,
think.
we blitzed those two.
Thoughts?
Great. The first movie is a masterpiece. Great
It is.
movie.
It still
almost
holds
a
up.
perfect
It's
movie,
just
yeah.
a really great movie.
and like really good looking. I mean, it's dated because it's just from an era that's
Yeah.
dated, right? Like fashion and blah blah blah. But like the effects still hold up.
Everything looks great.
Like,
Like,
they're
all the
excellent.
performances are great. It just looked good. It's a few of the like effects here and there, like the explosion that actually at the
Yes.
end of the movie, the explosion that happens at the top looks great, but when they're looking at the gate and they like lay an explosion graphic
know
over
exactly
top,
what you're talking
it just there's a couple bits
There's
and
one or
pieces
two, yeah.
here, but
Yeah.
the movie, for all intents and purposes, looks really great.
Yeah.
Performances are wonderful. It just felt like a very realized and very fully realized and well done.
That's actually
Package.
kind of ironic. And we'll go into this
because it was
in a
so
little bit.
chaotic.
It was
and-
so chaotic and very rushed.
Yes, but they made it work and to feel like it was like a fully realized thing.
I bet you a lot of it was done in the edit too. I bet you
Yes, I
like
imagine.
because I mean
As
there was a
lot of
ton
those
of
stuff
like
is.
Yeah.
rewrites and actors in and out and like who was doing stuff. But I
For the
bet
first
you-
one.
For the first one, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's funny. My actual like relationship with Ghostbusters is very different because I'm watching all this Ghostbusters stuff now in preparation for the episode.
You actually, because we watched Afterlife before you had seen
Yeah,
one
so I
and
watched
two.
the third one before. But as growing up, Ghostbusters didn't really exist from like the early 2000s for like
There was a big dead spot.
like from
pardon
like
the pun.
2000 probably
Yeah.
let's say 2001 to like 2016 there was like almost nothing Ghostbusters.
And
It
it
existed.
was the kids that grew up with it were in their early 20s and didn't have a ton of money to spend on Ghostbusters things.
It had to wait until people were in their like 30s,
and it had to wait until like the man children evolved
who wanted
and
all
had
their
money
kid
to-
stuff
yeah,
back. So
exactly.
there was this huge gap, which was most of my conscious childhood,
Yeah.
where there really wasn't a lot of Ghostbusters stuff. So it's funny, like I always knew it existed, and I obviously I probably saw the first Ghostbusters movie on TV when I was like 10 for like.
Yeah.
But I don't remember it. But I'm sure I saw it. I saw toys. I have two older brothers who both grew up with the movies, really loved it, and like they existed. But personally, I never had much of a.
It's funny
childhood with
you
it.
mentioned seeing it on TV because I remember seeing it like we rented it. I didn't see it in the theaters. But it was quickly one of my favorite things. And then a year or two later, it was on TV, and we had a VCR, and we just taped it off of TV. And so the copy that I watched religiously had both the TV edits, so no swearing, and there's one brief scene that's omitted.
Do you remember which scene?
Oh yeah. It's the one where Ray has the dream about having sex with a ghost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to interject, the card in the deck that represents that specific ghost, because a lot of the ghosts represent, in my mind, specific ones. It's a ghost called Drum Bellower. It untaps your ghost, your
It certainly
creatures.
tapped Ray.
Well, it below his drum.
Wow.
Yeah. You know what? I take it back. This recording is going to be full of those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
it is.
Neither Josh or I had any.
No. Yeah. If you come into this not
we
thinking
did not
that,
think
yeah.
that was okay.
Sorry. Please go.
But yeah, that was, and so, but also all the commercials from that era. Like there was a whole bunch of like TV commercials
For the Ghostbusters.
not for the Ghostbusters, for just things, because we taped it off of TV.
Oh.
And so they're just the commercials
Yeah.
from like, like a local mattress sales from like 1986 or 7, whenever we taped it off of TV.
I remember that, having like some VHSs growing up that your parents taped off TV, and it's like now in my mind, if I don't see an ad for this specific local RV right after this part, it's like
Totally.
where is it? I don't. It's not linked to my brain.
Sadly, at some point, I taped over it with something else. But the thing I taped over it with, I think, was the film Dragnet, which
There's a film.
Tom Hanks and Dan Aykroyd.
Oh, yes.
Excellent
Yes,
movie.
yes.
Underrated, I think.
Funny
But
picking another Dan Aykroyd movie.
I did the thing where you like pause, and so it doesn't have any commercials, but then it's shorter, and so it ends. And I remember the taped copy of Dragnet ends right when Ray and Zedmore are in the car driving and talking about the end of days.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's like basically the third
I
act of
remember
Ghostbusters
Revelations. Yeah.
following the full film Dragnet.
Yeah.
And then, so like I still had that, but
That's
yeah.
funny.
I've since, I don't know what happened to that VHS copy, but I've since been gifted the DVD like 3 different times because people are like, you like Ghostbusters? And I'm like, I have this already. Like,
You do seem like somebody that would love Ghostbusters. It seems like your bag.
Yeah. Well, and I think I might have loved it so much that like there's no other way. Like I would be a different person if I didn't like Ghostbusters. You know what I mean?
I see what you mean.
It's fundamental to your identity.
Like there's a lot about Bill Murray's mannerisms that informed like my interactions with the world.
I can see that. I can see that actually quite a bit. That like gentle sarcasm you have, and the yeah.
Just
it.
a little bit of that kind of, yeah.
So yeah, I want to jump into the first section here, which I'm calling The Ghost of Buster's Past, which we'll talk about Dan Aykroyd, his origins and his relationship to the spiritual world, which is quite in depth, as well as the original pitch for the movie.
And he's really the inception point of the idea of the story, right?
So Dan Aykroyd, SNL fame, his
one of the original.
Yeah, he was like the first cast.
First season.
Yep, first season. Actually, there's a show coming out. I can't remember. It's called Live from New York or something. I can't remember. There's a movie coming out which talks about it. It's a biopic kind of thing. But his, I think it was his father, yes, his father wrote a book called A History of Ghosts, which is apparently quite like a notable book. His grandfather experimented with radios in an attempt to contact spirits because he fixed radios. He worked with radios. And his great-grandfather was a renowned spiritualist, Samuel Augustus Ackroyd. He was a teacher, then a dentist, and in trying to find ways to help patients manage pain, because there was no anesthetics back then, he had read into hypnotism. And he was fascinated with the idea of if there was a way to use hypnotism to create a situation in a person that would be a conduit to communicate with spirits. So there was this vast history with Dan Aykroyd and the Aykroyd family of spiritualism.
Samuel Augustus Ackroyd sounds like a ghost. That sounds like a name a ghost would have.
I think it's the
It's the Augustus.
If you just said, well, yeah, I think giving somebody 3 names increases their chance of sounding like a ghost.
It definitely,
That's true, actually.
well,
yeah.
and a very specific type of ghost, like that sort of 19th century, 18th or 19th century Eastern
Yeah.
North America.
Well, Augustus is also like a very like ghost name.
yeah,
It
pretty
is.
waspy kind of, just sort of, like upper crust kind of
Yeah.
East Coast.
Waspy and wispy.
Yeah.
The so like the first spark that so Dan Aykroyd is there's no doubt that he is kind of the brainchild, the heart of the movie.
The heart of the Ghostbusters.
He is, and actually his character.
That's
was.
how Venkman refers to him at some point.
Oh, that's cute.
When
Yeah,
they're-
it does make sense.
When they all show up at Dana Barrett's, they've just left the mayor's office and they've been like released and allowed to go save the day. And
Yeah.
they show up and like there's a crowd of people outside. And they're all chanting Ghostbusters, Ghostbusters.
Yeah.
Which we'll come back to because the fact that
Yes.
the crowd was chanting
Yes,
that is
yes,
important.
Yes, I know exactly what you're alluding to.
But Bill Murray gets out and he's like race dance, the heart of the Ghostbusters.
And that's actually a great moment because Dan Aykroyd really is. So Dan Aykroyd was reading the Journal of reading an article in the Journal of the American Society for Psychical Research. Wow.
psychical.
The Journal of the American Society for Psychical Research. He was reading one of these magazines.
As you do.
As you do when you're Dan Aykroyd.
I think I got one in the bathroom right now.
And he wanted to do a modern take on movies like so Bob Hope did a movie called The Ghost Breakers,
Yes.
which will come back up later. But that was in the 1940s, which was basically somebody inherits a house and it's got ghosts and zombies, but there's also treasure, so they're trying to find the treasure. So that's Ghost Breakers. But he wanted to do a modern take on that. The original pitch, however, is nothing like not nothing like, but very dissimilar to what the actual 1984 movie was. So
I was reading into it. I was surprised that it's very different, but there's still like enough. There's the same, enough things running through it that are the same. Like they still had the Ecto. What's the name of the car?
Ecto 1.
Ecto
The
1?
car was still there,
Yeah,
and
okay,
there were
yep.
a couple bits and pieces here and there that
Which-
were like still the same.
As a kid, I didn't understand that the car was a hearse.
yeah, like an ambulance hearse. Yeah,
But like a hearse specifically is designed to take dead people
Totally.
around. And so it's, like as a kid, it was just like a weird looking car,
yeah.
especially because it's painted white and hearses are typically
Well,
black.
and it also has all that other stuff on it, so it really
Yeah. And,
you know,
and I
messes the
I
shape
thought it
up a
was,
little.
I literally just thought it was a station wagon
That's fine.
because it's
honestly,
got
I'm
that
in the same boat. Yeah.
shape, right?
Yeah.
And like it was the 80s. That was all I knew.
Yeah.
We didn't drive around in a hearse.
Yeah. So the original pitch, for those that don't know, probably many, hopefully that's why you're listening, was set in space in the future. So right away, you've lost New York. You've lost that quote unquote.
I mean,
modern
I would
time.
watch Ghostbusters in space.
Also, in the far-flung future of 2012.
Was it 2012?
Great.
Whoa.
That's always the gamble, right? With movies that you set in the future.
You
It's
have
like,
to
what
set
if
it.
we're nowhere?
You have to set it after you're definitely dead. Because
Totally.
yeah,
That's you do the 20XX, but then you eventually get to 2099, and then
So the other idea with the original pitch was there were Ghostbusters were plenty. There was a bunch of different Ghostbusters. They're all kind of competing because there's so many ghosts. There were also monsters pretty much on every page of the script, and big ones like Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, for example, was on page 20 of the script, whereas now it's like on page 120.
Yeah, it's way at the end.
Yeah. There were going to be 50 plus large scale monsters like that in the original pitch. And according to Ivan Reitman, who another Canadian, Dan Aykroyd as well, who became the director eventually, he was quoted as saying it would have cost probably over $200 million in
84.
Oh,
yeah,
yeah,
80 whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. It was also
Weren't they going to go to hell at some point in one of the scripts?
That was the third. So Hellbent. We'll talk about that a bit later.
But I think that was because it was taken out of an original, like an idea.
Oh, maybe.
At some point during the first one, they're like, and then like in the last act, we go to hell, and they're like,
yeah,
how are we going to film this?
Well, I know the original idea. We'll talk about this a bit more later, but the original idea for Ghostbusters 2 is Aykroyd wanted to oppose the big battle in the sky essentially at the end of the first one with going underground. We'll go into that a bit later, but
you can see pieces of that in the second one.
You do see it. Yeah, going the train
and the ooze tunnel.
The other thing about the original pitch is it was supposed to be a scary movie. The idea is that he wanted it to be kind of scary and not a comedy so much. Which of course
they cast the wrong people for that.
Well, yeah. So the original, there was 3 people that Dan Aykroyd wrote the original pitch in mind. Those 3 people being himself,
John Belushi,
who
is also a very funny person.
Totally, and so was the third, Eddie Murphy.
Eddie
so
Murphy,
I don't know how you would.
Yeah, having a horror movie with Dan Aykroyd.
I don't think it was a horror movie so much, but it was
like
supposed to be suspenseful.
But like a suspense movie with Dan Aykroyd, John Belushi, and Eddie Murphy it's a choice for sure.
It's definitely a choice.
That's almost like too much, right? Like having John Belushi and Eddie Murphy, or even Bill Murray and Eddie Murphy, is like
well, it's detrimental to your fan base, right? Like they're going to assume that it's a funny movie, and if it's not,
that's also
like
true.
They show up like, what the heck?
But I feel like they would also be competing. Like both of them are kind of like the leading comic person in the movies they're in.
Oh, I see. Yeah,
and it would be tough to have both of like you need a straight man and a funny man, not two funny
Bluto
men.
and Axel in the same movie.
Exactly.
Yeah. That would be an interesting movie. The original name ideas were Ghost Smashers and Ghost Breakers. There was a 1975 series Ghostbusters, as we talked about before.
Capital B Busters.
So it couldn't be used, but Columbia Pictures, we'll get into it, but got the rights eventually. And that was a live action version of future cartoons, of which there were only 15 episodes of the Ghostbusters.
Really? They only did like
apparently
truncated season.
Like of the original?
No, of that the cartoon based on the 75.
No, there were way more. They were like 60.
Was it really? Of the Ghostbusters? Not the real Ghostbusters?
The Ghostbusters cartoon with like
Filmation, I think. It was
Filmation did. Yeah, there was like 60 episodes. Unless where I was looking was wrong,
it could be.
There's about 60 episodes.
So we touched on this, but originally it was written with Belushi in mind, with Eddie Murphy, and Aykroyd was actually literally writing a line for Belushi when he got the phone call about Belushi's death, which was pretty tragic. They were, of course, very close. Blues Brothers, even they started as SNL.
They were on SNL
friends,
together.
Yeah,
they came up with the Blues Brothers together, and
yeah. So they had that, but beyond that, they were also quite close. And then to replace Belushi, Aykroyd thought of Bill Murray, who also later.
He kind of came in to fill the void on SNL.
Yeah, exactly.
That Belushi had left.
Yeah. Bill Murray, what a character that guy is. We'll probably talk about this a little bit more, but Bill Murray and Aykroyd had like an unofficial agreement that he was going to do the movie, but he never actually signed anything. And that's apparently was very typical of Bill Murray. He just kind of shows up or he doesn't.
He's
Right.
a famous flake a bit. He's just kind of he's there if he wants to be, and if he doesn't want to be.
But at the same time, he's also like this creative powerhouse on sets. Like he drives movies, certain types of movies, I guess. But so of course the original version couldn't work, as Ivan Reitman noted, too expensive, and it just didn't quite. There was the big thing that Ivan Reitman really liked about the movie was at the heart. It was essentially, as he is quoted as saying, is janitors for ghosts or firefighters for ghosts, and he thought there was something there. He did note that changes would need to happen. He wanted to see something set in the 80s in New York, and it was actually his idea. He floated the idea of possibly scientists that had been kicked out of their university, and they decided to go into business for themselves, which is exactly what the first
That's the first act of the movie.
Yeah, exactly. He also thought it would be good to bring in Harold Ramis, who played Egon. So Harold Ramis, he wrote for previous Reitman films, Stripes, and what was the other one?
Meatballs.
Meatballs
Was the other.
Yes, which was Ramis and Reitman.
Yeah, and
Bill Murray. Yeah.
They did a lot of movies together.
Yeah, well, and this happened all kind of around the same time. Those movies, especially Stripes, made a lot of money for Columbia Pictures, so they knew that if they could kind of have this,
they could use the same character, the same people,
the same team, that it would be easier to sell. Aykroyd has noted that Ramis came to the table knowing a lot about the occult. He was actually quite shocked and surprised about how much he knew about the history.
Oh, interesting.
Despite being
a skeptic
and not believing in ghosts, they still like really agreed.
It's funny to have the team, like, because Aykroyd is such a true believer in this stuff. Like it's not like he has a passive interest or like likes this stuff.
It's not a hobby for him. It's a life.
If he hadn't have become a comedian, he would be doing something.
Doing what his father did, and just like it's just really interesting to have like someone who truly believes like that this is all real, and someone who just thinks it's interesting and knows a lot about it, but doesn't believe it at all.
Well, I think the benefit too is Harold Ramis was such an intelligent guy, and he just knew a lot about it, that he can still know the facts about the history and have respect for that without actually believing in the ghost itself. So I thought that was pretty cool.
I'm in that camp as well. Like I really like the world of study that's come about around things like ghosts and the paranormal. Like I don't necessarily believe that any of those things exist, but I love the idea of people trying to contact the dead, or people going to the lengths of cataloging the different types of ghosts and then making a book and then selling that book and then people buying that book, and like that there's this world of people that do believe it, and the level of pseudoscientific study that goes into it, and
the amount of high intelligence level thought that goes into this kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And not that it's an unintelligent thing, because I think there's some this gets a little philosophical, but like I think there's comfort in thinking that these other things, that there's more to the world than what we see, and it's why we have the occult and religion and all of these kind of things, is because like as humans we want.
Well, it's a hope.
We want to. There's more than just these four walls. That there's something else out there that we could learn. That we otherwise like
everything's explored.
We know everything already. Yeah,
except the seafloor apparently.
Yeah,
like 5%.
Maybe that's where all the ghosts are.
Oh, sea ghosts.
Sea ghosts.
Next movie, Sea Ghost 4. That's gonna.
Sea Ghost. Sea Ghost. Run Ghost.
Run from Ghost. Josh he's seeing a future. He's devising his plans.
Do only humans get ghosts, or do animals get ghosts too?
I mean, there are spectral ghosts
fish?
Are there like ghost sharks?
Oh yeah,
man.
I think there's several movies. So we were trying to find some like
Deep Blue Sea, but with ghost sharks.
Particularly
Deep Blue Sea.
No, there's
there we go. We got
there's
there.
absolutely a movie called Ghost Shark, and I have seen it.
Okay.
And
not even like trying to
no. And it was like
ghost shark.
probably right around just after like Sharknado.
Oh, yeah.
Is it an asylum movie?
I think it might be an asylum movie.
Okay.
And I believe that the premise is that anywhere that water is, the shark can show up. And so, of course, I mean, the easiest thing to avoid a shark is not go into the water, right?
Right.
But then this movie goes out of its way to have like, oh, the basement's flooded, and then all of a sudden there's a shark, you know, or
but,
like.
but
Oh,
but
gosh.
I'm water, so could the shark
Oh,
appear
I
in me?
don't recall them getting into that,
Yeah,
but
It
it's
clearly.
just becomes the
it's like
the people.
like the shark comes out of the bathtub, and
Right.
it comes like the like all of these like ridiculous things, and
That's really funny.
it's
Body,
exactly
it can
there's a
it
ghost
can
shark.
be in bodies of water, not bodies that are water.
Okay, that's the delineation.
So we've kind of segued now into section 2,
Ghost shark.
ghost shark. No, I call this section "Bustin' makes a film good."
It does.
I thought that was pretty good. It's like a
A
mild
different
one.
kind
You
of
thought
film,
all of
but-
these were good. That's why you.
I
left
I
me.
know all of these are. so
I don't want to know, but like, what are the ones that didn't make it in? What are the ones that weren't good enough?
Oh,
good. I'll be honest. Most
Steve
of
is a
these
true
are
believer.
first.
He thinks they're all
Most
good.
of these are first drafts.
Yeah, he
Okay.
is our Dan Aykroyd.
Okay.
He believes they're
So
all good.
actually, before we cross over, there's a movie that Dan
Cross
Aykroyd. There's a movie that Dan Aykroyd did called Nothing But Trouble.
'Kay.
That is bizarre. It's so strange.
I'm assuming it's full of trouble.
It is,
Nothing-
and it's
nothing
it's
but.
Dan Aykroyd and Chevy Chase
Well, there you go.
and a couple other people, but it is. I mean, it's widely criticized as just being a terrible movie, but it's also like this is what happens when you give Dan Aykroyd full creative control. Like his ideas are just so wild, but they need to be reined in by an Ivan Reitman, or you know, a whoever, or a Harold Ramis, and they need to be brought back down to earth. And
And I think he knows that. I think that's why he's so willing to bring on other writers.
but the other thing is, apparently he's just like the nicest guy in the world, and
Yeah.
everyone like loves him and loves to work with him. And so, like, you know, even Chevy Chase is on record as saying, like, yeah, like, are you gonna say no to Dan Aykroyd? Like, he's just such a nice guy. Like, Chevy Chase is known for not being a nice guy.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
like,
totally.
yeah.
So Ghostbusters, 1984, Ivan Reitman directing. Again, he just coming off of Meatballs and Stripes, two very successful movies for Columbia Pictures. He was tasked with selling the movie. So all they had, this is 1983 in May, I think it was May 1983. All they had was they nailed down the overall story, just the basics. And he took that idea, Ivan Reitman took that idea to Columbia Pictures head Frank Price in May of 1983. Yeah, I do have it here, May 1983. The movie almost had to change its name, so we briefly talked about this. So Frank Price, this is an interesting fact that I just want to bring up here.
I think I know this.
Yeah, so I just actually rediscovered this yesterday, and for those listening, if you have Netflix, watch The Movies That Made Us, the Ghostbusters episode specifically. It interviews Frank Price, Ivan Reitman, late Ivan Reitman, and they do talk about this. But so, actually, I'll bring this up a bit later because you wanted to talk about the scene in Ghostbusters where they're chanting the name, and I think it plays better.
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
whenever
part,
you
yeah.
want to talk about, but yeah.
Yeah. So his one pitch line to Frank Price was "Ghost janitors in New York." There it is. With an estimated budget, basically Frank was like, because of the success of those previous two movies, he was like, I can see this working. How much do you think it'll cost? He had done, I think it was Stripes for $10 million. So he was thinking about all the effects and stuff. He's like, probably about 25, 30 million. Frank was like, no problem. Let's do it. And he was like, wait, we're green lighting this now? And he's like, yes, there's one caveat. No, this is May 1983. He's like, this has to release for June 1984. So they had a year to write the script, film, and get all the effects done, which is, for those that don't know,
That's a
that
lot.
is crazy.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot to do. If you've got the script maybe. But if you all
Totally.
don't even have the script yet, then it's right, because everything relies on you having at least an idea. Like
They
you,
do have the idea, but they don't know.
you
they
can't
don't know their
start
shots.
production or locations or
Well, and
like,
how is effects
sets
supposed to
and-
start its
yeah.
stuff if there's no script? So directly after green lighting, the three of them, Ivan Reitman, Harold Ramis, and Dan Aykroyd, went to Aykroyd's home in Martha's Vineyard into the basement as to not be distracted by the views, because Martha's Vineyard is very beautiful. And for 2 or 3 weeks straight, just writing. There's actually an interview with Harold Ramis's daughter Violet. It was in that Netflix show that I was just talking about. That's noted that there was a lot of marijuana involved.
Oh yeah, that
In
makes sense.
that, like 2-3 weeks. But yeah, they buckled down and not completed script, but in 2-3 weeks they got the basic script
enough of
the
a
story.
framework that they could start.
They could tell effects, we're going to need these effects, we're going to need this happening, that kind of thing there too. So chaotic. But that also led to the filming of the movie being very chaotic as well, because they were changing things on the fly. There's one scene, the whole crossing of the streams, that was a last minute idea when they were trying to figure out on set while filming, how do we make they knew they had to defeat Gozer and Stay Puft, but how do we do that? They were like, well, why don't we do something about crossing the streams? And then they went back and added in that scene in the hotel
Interesting.
of like, don't cross the streams.
Oh, interesting.
That was added later because they came up with the idea for the rooftop explosion crossing the streams thing. So that's the kind of movie they were. This is like
incredibly key story beats were being added as they were making it.
Apparently, most of Bill Murray's dialogue was ad libbed.
That makes sense.
Like, yeah,
yeah. I do wonder about the cats and dogs living together. That's one of my favorite parts.
Or if Dickless on the written, was that written, or did he just say it?
this man has no dick.
It's true. This man has no dick.
Apparently, Louis Tully, when he's having the party and he's introducing people, it's one long shot, and he just like he just rattled all that off the top of his head, just random.
He's not Martin Short.
Rick Moranis.
Rick Moranis is
so good,
Yeah.
so good. I'm
SCTV.
definitely
Moranis,
SCTV.
yes.
Yeah. But yeah, that whole thing about like the price of salmon and like, this is something, and he's like talking about like, his friend,
Got this business doing this.
He didn't invite friends, he invited clients because he can write
it's
it
tax
off.
write-off.
It's just so good, all of that. But he just basically came up with all of that.
So on that front, let's talk about the cast a little bit. Obviously, Aykroyd, Ramis,
Bill Murray.
Bill Murray. I was going to call him.
Did
Bill,
you just call him Milbury?
No, I should have. I was going to call him Bill Pullman. I was like, that's a different.
That's a very different movie.
person.
No, he fights aliens, not ghosts.
That's true. Yeah. Mr. President. So the original person that was supposed to play Louis Tully was actually was written for John Candy, and there's actually storyboards.
Also SCTV.
Yeah. There's storyboards where the person they've drawn in the storyboards is very obviously John Candy, because it was written for him. John Candy, however, he apparently had a hard time getting the character of Louis Tully that we now know. He was trying to do there's one time where he's like, I want to do a German accent for it. Like, can you imagine I'm Vince Clotho, Master of Gozer.
I could definitely imagine that. But
yeah, okay, that's fair.
But him as
not
like
very
this
good.
weird German accountant that lives down the hall.
Yeah. I
a
think
little
there was
weird.
something about sorry, what's the actor's name again?
Rick Moranis?
Yeah, I
Or-
keep wanting to call him Martin Short because he's short. But there's something about Rick Moranis' height and how he's a smaller guy that just adds so much, especially when he's like the demon dog possessed.
Totally. Well, and especially when he's next to Sigourney Weaver, who is quite tall.
yeah.
And just that hilarious dynamic of they're the two that need to be together, and it's just such a funny.
Whereas
you know.
John Candy was a very tall and very big guy.
He's a big guy. Yeah.
So you lose that.
I think John, they, if they had done it, we would have been like, we couldn't possibly imagine Rick Moranis having done it, right?
Right,
Like,
yeah.
we got what we got, but it would have been a very different character, because I could see him doing the sort of more the used car salesman type.
Very loud,
The
very,
loud,
yeah.
boisterous kind
Totally.
of character for it,
I-
less than the sort of meek.
Well, he was loud and boisterous, but he's more neurotic than he was
Totally.
And
which I
very,
think was
very harmless. Very
yeah. He's a small yappy dog where she was a.
He gets
She was like a
locked out
Doberman.
of his apartment in 3 different scenes.
So
in
this
the
is
movie.
actually something I wanted to bring up. He, as being the key master, gets locked out of
Oh, I
almost
never
every
got
door. So he gets locked out of his apartment twice or 3 times. He's also, when the dog is chasing him, he's locked out of the restaurant.
Oh, that might be the 3rd time that he's locked.
So,
out of something.
and I think
Yeah.
that it's got to have been a purposeful.
That's
I
pretty
mean,
funny,
if not,
actually.
it's great. No,
brilliant.
it's great.
But he gets locked out of pretty much every door he tries to get into.
That's pretty funny, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's an interesting one. Now, you had mentioned Sigourney Weaver. So Sigourney Weaver as I can't remember her character's name.
Dana Barrett.
Right, Dana Barrett. Good. Amazing in the movie.
Fantastic.
On the heels of Alien.
Right.
So a very different movie.
Wildly different.
I mean, she was fantastic in it. She's fantastic in pretty much any movie she's in. Her audition was apparently, according to Reitman, somewhere a mix between frightening and amazing. So she came into the room. She's like, I think I should turn into one of these dogs. That wasn't another example of like
Writing it on the fly.
Collaborative
script. This liquid script that was happening. She's like, I feel like they had seen these dogs. They knew these dogs were going to be in it. And she's like, I think I should turn into one of these dogs. And then as part of her auditions, she jumped up on the couch or the table and started like snarling and growling like a dog. Ivan Reitman apparently had to just say like, okay, that's great. Never do that again until it's time to do the actual movie. She obviously got the part, but he said it was such an interesting thing. There's her yearbook quote is obviously a photo of Sigourney Weaver, and it just said, "Please God, don't let me be normal." So, and I think that like carries out, and like she plays such great characters, famously. The other other quote unquote character in the movie, New York. I know it's like a
Still played
stigma
out
to say like, hey, it's the 4th girl,
the 5th Ghostbuster.
yeah, the 5th Ghostbuster. But New York really did.
It's
set
not
the
the
scene.
same movie if it's somewhere else.
Totally.
And one of the things watching the movie that I was like, man, New York, it's so quiet. It's so not busy.
Oh, in
like looking
84,
at New York in the 80s, it's like, it's just there's these empty spaces with like a normal amount of people in them. And
Oh yeah.
it was just like the library. There's only like a couple people here.
But like in 1984, people already thought it was like too busy.
And it was just looking. It's like, oh my god,
But
there's
yeah,
no one here.
If that movie had been in like L.A., it's just a different movie.
Different movie,
Right?
Funny enough, so
I could see them doing Chicago.
yeah,
Chicago would have worked
yeah,
maybe. But,
yeah.
but New York.
They did a lot of the shooting in LA.
Yes.
A lot of the interior stuff. So iconically in New York, Hook and Ladder number 8 building at 14 North Moore Street.
I've been there.
Have you?
Yeah.
Of course. If you've been in New York, of course you
Yeah.
would have gone there.
No, I had to do.
And it's still there. They have like a permanent fixture.
Yeah,
outside
they've
the
got
Ghostbusters symbol.
and they had when I was there, they had a little something painted on the sidewalk as well.
Yeah,
and
it is.
it's a functioning.
It is and was a functioning
fire hall. Yeah,
Now-
that's only the exteriors though.
Yes, so the interior was actually a retired fire hall in LA that they used that happened to be
Interesting.
about the same
Dimensions.
width, so they could get away with it. And similar thing. So iconic New York City Library, public library, with the lions.
The lions. They have
opening
names.
up. Oh, do they?
I can't remember what their names are, but yeah,
Is it Vince, Clortho, and
Zool.
Zool?
No,
Those are dogs, demon dogs. So when they meet Egon in the upstairs room, Egon's like listening with a stethoscope, and
Yes.
Peter Venkman taps on the table. That is New York.
That's
City.
the library.
Yeah, but
When they go down
downstairs,
to the stacks below.
yeah, and like all the effect of them blowing the Dewey Decimal cards out of the drawers and stuff. That's all in LA public library. Yeah,
Oh,
so
that wasn't on a set. That's actually still a
no, that
location.
and the aisles and the library ghost, the Gray Lady is her actual name.
No human would stack books like this.
Peter Venkman.
So good. It's just so good. But that's the kind of like, that's my humor right there, right? Like
Yeah,
that's-
totally.
like,
Yeah, very much so. Bill Murray. Also all the rooftop. So 55 Central Park West.
been there as well.
Yeah, that's an actual building. I don't know if it's
It
actually 55.
No, it's right beside the Dakota building, which was where John Lennon lived and eventually died in front of. And it's right next to that. So it's like a really nice building, but it's nowhere near as tall.
Yeah, they
as
added
it's depicted. They added with matte
like
painting,
13
like a whole
stories or
bunch
something.
of,
and all the shooting for the scenes on the roof that was done in a soundstage.
yes,
So,
yeah.
I wanted to talk about, so obviously they wanted to have Belushi in the movie, but they couldn't because he had sadly passed. However, they wanted to pay an homage to him, and there is a very famous ghost, Slimer. So apparently the night before they had to use the model to shoot Slimer, like the model of Slimer to shoot, some of the producers came in and said, hey, make him look like Jim Belushi, like his
John Belushi,
sorry, Jim's his brother. John Belushi, especially like the Bluto character
from Animal House.
Animal House, yeah. And the guy's like, this is the night before they have to shoot. He essentially told them he did, and their reaction was, it's perfect. It looks like John Belushi. And not that it doesn't, but it doesn't.
I think there's a level of everyone could be like, well, it's the day of, what are we going to do?
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, but I'd also heard that too. And yeah, because he's like eating, and like famously in Animal House, there's the food fight scene, and he's eating all the I'm a zit.
Get it?
You know. And
Yeah. There's some other interesting things about Slimer. So looks like John Belushi, apparently. The noises of him eating it's edited, but it's Ivan Reitman actually doing like the, because he's got kind of a bit of a lower voice. And actually, fun fact, he also did the voice again, then post edited to sound a bit deeper. But when Dana says, there is no Dana, only Zool, that's
that was
Ivan Reitman that does the voice. Yep. But with Slimer specifically, there's one shot where it's flying around a chandelier when they're in the big dining room.
Yeah, in the banquet room.
Yeah.
Of the hotel.
What they did for this, so this is they're under the gun, especially the effects team. They have to get all this done in under a year because they didn't even know what shots they were going to need for a month. What they did for that is they spray painted a literal peanut green and added like some little details on it, and it's just a peanut that's flying around. If you get a zoomed in shot, it's going to be blurry, but it's fairly obviously just a peanut.
That's really, really funny.
It's very funny. But this is like the problem solving of
I love that. Yeah,
especially back then.
Movie making, problem solving. I came into it all a little too late, and it had already started to go into a lot of visual, like computer assisted, computer generated kind of effects. But I really like the sort of practical movie magic, and
yeah,
I think if I'd been born maybe 10 years earlier, 20 years earlier, that would have been a field that I would have gone into.
Sure.
Right.
Well, that's what like our friend Matt.
Yeah,
that's what he does. He does practical effects.
Yeah.
So he loves. There's like a science.
Oh, absolutely. And some, just when you see these behind the scenes things of like how they did stuff, especially up until kind of the mid to late 90s when everything was still even the Matrix.
Yeah.
Which does have a lot of computer assisted things, practical photography, a lot of green screen, but like, the bullet time is just a whole bunch of cameras all timed specifically to like do that sort of wrap around.
Whereas now they would probably do
well,
that
even in the
post.
second Matrix, they did it all with CG instead, right? And it just doesn't look the same. It just doesn't feel the same. So yeah, and that's what I was saying at the beginning, like the effects hold up because they're real things. It's like watching OG Star Wars and or like Jedi with Jabba the Hutt. Like there was like a real foam rubber thing that was like that. And for the actors, they get to interact with that thing.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think probably Slimer and Jabba were probably created from very similar materials because they almost have like a similar kind of texture when
They're
you
a
get
little
to
rubbery, little flabby.
Yeah, like you can almost feel what they feel like.
Well, there's
in your mind.
In your
the
dream.
speaking of effects for this movie, they actually created a whole effects company. So it was I can't remember his name. I don't have these notes down. This is just off the top of my head, but he was with a company, and they did like all of Spielberg's stuff, and they were hired to do Temple of Doom. So they couldn't do Ghostbusters, but one of the heads of the company who
Wasn't it
Industrial
ILM,
Light
was it?
Magic?
it was I think it was ILM.
Yeah.
And one of the heads of ILM was kind of becoming disillusioned with it because he said it was becoming too corporate. So he wanted to do his own thing. Columbia Pictures fronted him $5 million to start his own company so that they could. So basically, they poached him and like some of the best people from ILM to create a new company called Boss. And Boss did all the effects for this movie. But it was their first movie as a company, and all just like freshly poached and just like out to make a name for themselves. And they did I mean, for the times, an amazing job. Even for now, an amazing job.
It
with
still
a
looked.
year.
I mean, again, I just saw it. It
Yeah.
looked great.
Yeah, pretty fantastic. There is one other interesting thing that I found on the old interwebs about the first movie. The ad campaign was pretty awesome for it. But there's this one thing, they had a phone line, and I'll put a link to it in the show notes. But because the phone line's long dead, but there's a YouTube video that's plays the message, and it's just Venkman and Stans talking about like, hey, you've reached the Ghostbusters. We're out. We've got to go to there's a ghost in a ballet studio, and they start talking about the girls, and it's like, oh, it's going to depend on their schedules. So, but we'll get back to you. And it's just a cool little thing.
So in the movie, there's an ad that they do where the three of
Yes.
them kind of, you know, like, we're ready to believe you. Like, that's the one that Dana Barrett sees and then calls after,
Yeah.
or walks down to see them after the egg frying incident in her apartment. They took that. It's a 555. It's a local New York
555 is fake. Yeah.
fictional
yeah.
number. But they took that and replaced the number with this 800 number and made that the ad on TV after the movie came out to like continue promoting the movie.
I wonder if that was the number.
And that's the number they used.
Oh,
yeah.
okay,
And
okay,
so,
okay.
because I was just reading something about that. And yeah, it was Dan Aykroyd and Bill Murray just, you know,
Yeah.
improving and riffing an answering machine message.
Yeah. I'll put a link in the show notes.
Apparently,
it's pretty fun.
they got thousands of calls a day, 24 hours a day for
Amazing.
months.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Wow.
It was just, you know, kids or whoever just wanted to. If I had seen that, and I don't think they
I would
ran
call it all the
in
time.
Canada, I would have, yeah, especially if it was free.
Speaking of phone numbers, actually, so there's a sign company that puts up their sign on the building, and on the side of the vehicle is an actual phone number to the sign company, and that sign company, it's a slightly different name now, but it's essentially the same sign company. I looked it up on Google the other day. That sign company's still running,
Still
and
the
it's
same
still
number?
the same phone number.
That's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
I hope they got extra business.
Yeah. Is there anything about any facts about the first movie before we move on?
You talked about selling the movie.
Oh yes, right, of course. There's the famous crowd scene where they're chanting "Ghostbusters, Ghostbusters, Ghostbusters," and we had previously talked about how the fact that Ghostbusters was owned by Filmation, which was owned by Universal. Now, the Frank Price, who was the head of Columbia that greenlit the movie, he was like, "Okay, we'll figure it out later." They actually wanted them to shoot the movie twice. Once with all the things saying Ghostbusters, and once with it saying I think it was Ghost Breakers. Yeah, it was Ghost Breakers, because they didn't know if they could get the rights. So there was this whole like emergency, like,
But they just
in case they
didn't.
can't. So the partway through trying to do it, they decided absolutely not. We can't.
We're just going to commit
We can't
to it.
put this sign up on the thing that says Ghostbusters. Take it down. Shoot everything again that says Ghost Breakers.
You have Janine go like, Ghost Breakers, what do you want?
What do you want? It
Yeah,
doesn't-
like it's not going to work.
And the kicker was the crowd chanting near the end of the movie, "Ghostbusters, Ghostbusters."
And it's so integral to that whole scene, and it's just
Totally.
part of that.
Well, so somebody on the crew went over to a payphone that was near, and he called, I don't know if it was Frank or not, but called one of the heads of Columbia and was like, listen to this, held the phone out, and they just heard, "Ghostbusters, Ghostbusters, Ghost." And essentially at that point, the head of it was just like, just do it. Just do Ghostbusters. We'll figure it out
There's
later.
some other thing, and I'm not going to get any of the facts right, but there was some other thing about how the head of one company who had initially, and maybe it was Frank Price,
So this is,
and he left one company and ended up at another company.
yes.
Like I think he left Columbia and ended up at
So the
at
movies
Universal
that
or
made us do it
something.
really well. They sell it really well too.
Yeah.
As a they're that's a great series.
It
If
is
you
a great
haven't
series.
watched it, the movies that made us, the toys that made
The
us,
Toys That Made Us is also
yeah.
very good.
But so Coca-Cola owned Columbia, and they were trying to shut down. They were trying to shut down the movie. They didn't want it to happen, and Frank was fighting with them a lot on that. Eventually, Frank left because he's like, "Well, it used to be that I had full say, and now I don't. So why am I even here?" He went to Universal, who then, when they needed to get the rights for Ghostbusters, guess who the head was?
It was
Frank.
right? And
And
so
of
he was
course
an
Frank
ally.
gave
He was a
him-
buddy, and he was that's it. Yes.
He gave them the name just to use for the movies. So that was pretty cool.
But yeah, no, I can't think of anything else other than I will say and we'll talk about the song, I'm assuming. at
Yeah,
some point.
one of the last things we'll
But
talk about.
my experience with the first movie was the song first.
Oh, interesting.
And so I remember seeing the music video for the song
We'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
It's very weird.
and being just super, and I don't know if it was the music video for the song or if it was some other thing where there was just like, because it was like a live performance at, like, let's say the Grammys or something, because it was such a huge,
Right.
there was some thing. And I remember watching it and just being like, this is the greatest thing ever. This is the greatest song ever.
This is
And-
before you'd seen the movie.
Before I'd seen the movie, I didn't know there was a movie. I was like 3 or 4, and I was just sort of like, I'm super into this song. And then I remember my parents, without me, had rented it. And then they called me in and they were like, "Hey, we're going to watch a movie." And I was like, "Okay." And they're like, "This is the movie based on the song that you like." And I was like, "What? There's a movie about this?" Whoa. And it was, I remember
They made
I-
a movie based on the song?
and I remember the whole thing with the that sort of first scene in the library in the basement,
Yep.
and like just that was it.
Yeah.
I'm sold.
That's awesome.
I still have that tape somewhere, the Ghostbusters soundtrack
Oh, really? Cassette?
cassette.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Moving to the next section, which I called Two You Gonna Call, talking about Ghostbusters 2.
Hmm.
I mean, that was
was
tame.
better.
That's
That
tame.
was better.
Is it?
1989.
Yeah, full 5 years.
5
after,
years.
which is
Yeah.
a long time for
Yeah.
a sequel in the 80s.
And some things happen. There's a cartoon, which we'll talk about after, but there's
Yeah.
still Ghostbuster thing happening. But this movie almost never happened because the head of Columbia, who took over, David Putnam, had said of Bill Murray, he was, quote, "an actor who makes millions off movies but gives nothing back to his art," end quote. But I mean, wow. Bill Murray, he does have, there are stories about him and how he comes across, and maybe he is, but he definitely comes across as thinking he's better than a lot of people.
I think he just knows. He just knows, right? Like he just knows what's going to
Yeah.
work and what doesn't. Like, name a bad Bill Murray performance. Like he just knows. Like he's been in not great movies, but he's always been good. Like he
Yeah.
knows what to do to make things work.
Yeah.
So, I think
I couldn't say for sure if he's good in the Garfield movies.
Well, I mean, his voice is in it.
yeah.
There's some interesting fact about
Yeah, we'll
his
chat
voice, but we'll
about
talk about that. But because of that quote, Murray wanted nothing to do with Columbia Pictures. But Putnam was fired in 1987, and the new head made Ghostbusters 2 a priority. In classic Aykroyd fashion, the first draft had much loftier goals. So apparently, in the first draft, for Ghostbusters 2. Dana is kidnapped, taken to Scotland, where she finds a fairy ring, the ring of mushrooms, and an underground world and society. So this whole underground thing, Aykroyd wanted to oppose the first movie's climax, the big battle in the quote-unquote sky, to do an underground world. And he ended up deciding that so it was going to be obviously in Scotland. He ended up deciding keeping that New York thing was really good for story, and it was such a big quote-unquote character in the first movie. So he kind of scrapped that.
Yeah, he really, that's a crazy concept. Like, totally wildly different.
Totally.
Like, let's go to Scotland and fairies?
Yeah, it makes me think, I mean, who knows? But this is back to what you were saying about Dan Aykroyd, you were saying about Dan Aykroyd, how he just has these grandiose ideas,
wild ideas that need to be reined in and stuff. But
which is great.
It starts the conversation, right?
Yeah, and as long as you know, as Dan Aykroyd, you know, oh yeah, my ideas are crazy. I need somebody to help me filter these. As long as you're cool with that, I think it's a great place to start. Murray did say that what he had signed up for Ghostbusters 2, though maybe not that Scottish fairy thing, wasn't actually what was scripted and filmed. So that's also an interesting point too. Now, Ghostbusters 1, Ghostbusters 2. Josh, you had a unique experience where you watched both of them for the first time
back to back.
Yes. What were your thoughts on that?
So I don't think that's the way to do it.
No. So as obviously the first movie is great, like
amazing,
really amazing movie. I forget I don't know if I said it. I can't remember if I said it during the episode, but I think I did. It's like I said, it's a full movie. Everything was there, and it's a unique, its own standalone thing.
Yeah.
Whereas the second feels very much like it was a movie made for like the fans of the first. It wasn't just like its own.
Made a little bit by committee. Like, we've got some boxes to check.
Yes, and it felt like there was just a lot of like moments and beats they had to hit to, like, for the fans or for the kids.
For sure.
And like they were
new toy opportunities.
Checking boxes is a really good way.
So
to
the toy
describe
opportunity thing is an interesting thing, because this is the beginning or middle of that era of making movies. I would say the beginning. Making movies to sell toys.
Yes.
And making shows to sell toys.
So, like, I think it's 82 or 83.
Yeah.
The Reagan administration lifts a bunch of regulations around that kind of stuff. And so you have this, like, G.I. Joe, He-Man, Transformers.
When you can start advertising to kids more freely.
Yes. And so there's all of this, like, these things are 22-minute commercials for toys.
Right.
The toys help sell, the comic books, and the comic books reinforce the stories in the cartoons. It's this, like, circle of, like, comics, toys, cartoons, all of this kind of stuff. Right. And if you've got a movie tie-in, even better.
Yeah. And I think, like, Ghostbusters 2 is a good movie, but just not nearly as good as the first. It just is like it feels a little more half-baked. It feels a little more...
It's the classic sophomore outing, when a band puts all of their heart and energy into that first record, and then they get huge, and then the studio's like, make another one.
Oh yeah, it's because they have 15, 20 years to write the first one.
Exactly.
And they have a couple.
And so
years
although in this case they had 1 year, so they can't fall upon.
They had 1 year, but it was also an idea that had digested in Dan Aykroyd's brain for a while, and then it was sort of like, okay, no, now we're like, eyes are on this. People know about this.
You also have the issue of, like, when on the first movie, this is a brand new idea.
Exactly.
So everything you do is going to be fresh, and then when you do the second movie, you don't have any of that freshness to fall on. You have to recycle it and try and make it different.
For me, I think 1984, this is a weird statement. I think 1984 is the most 80s year there was. Like, if you look at the styles and it's like peak of everything you think of when you think of 80s. By 1989, it's not even really 80s anymore. There's a lot of things that, like, that's sort of like late 80s, early 90s,
right? Fashion,
style, and just some of the things that were, like, in the movie. And I think that sort of 1984 style and aesthetic was already 5 years gone, and it had already
Right.
shifted so much. And like, even little things like Janine's glasses and like Louis Tully's like
Well, so that
look, and like there's just a bunch of things. Like
know
Bill
what?
Murray's got like a little bit more of
A lot of really classic 80s movies came out in 1984.
100%.
Terminator, Beverly Hills Cop, Karate Kid. So I'm
It-
like, okay, maybe there's some
No, there's
credence
and
to what
you
you're saying.
start looking at like
Never-Ending Story.
you start looking
Wow.
at like music that was like it's like right around that era. 1982 is also a really good
1984 came out in 1984.
Yeah.
The movie.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
funny. I didn't know that.
You had mentioned.
I think they just did that because they were like, "Hey,
this is the time.
this is
If we're gonna
now's
do
the
it.
time." Yeah.
You had mentioned Janine's glasses, so I wanted to talk about. We'll go into the actual facts about the cartoon in the next section, but so between 84 and 89, Ghostbusters 1 and Ghostbusters 2, there was the cartoon. And a lot of the things in the cartoon, like Egon had blonde, tall hair with a swirl in it.
Yeah.
It was
There's
were
some likeness rights issues, right? Like Harold
Oh.
Ramis wasn't going to sign off on being in a cartoon or something like that.
Yeah, okay. So there was that, and I mean the voices were all different, but also like Janine in Ghostbusters 2 was designed to more align with the cartoon.
Right. And that's also, I think the first movie isn't a kid's movie.
Totally. It's not. It was
Right?
originally supposed to be kind of scary. And,
Yeah.
and
And but it appealed to kids because it's not for kids.
it's scary enough that
You watch it with
some
your
kids
parents, but it's also like, this is also something the whole family could sort of watch. A few
yeah.
scenes.
I
you
think
did.
it was also a big part of why I liked 2 less, that it had been sort of declawed a little bit.
Well,
like,
so
it was-
Absolutely.
another point that I wanted to make: the first movie, and while you and I, Josh, were watching the first movie, you noted how much they smoked.
they
There was a lot of smoking.
Yeah.
they smoke a lot.
And in the second one, none, because again, they knew that kids were going to be watching this movie, so they pulled a lot of that out. So
Yeah, it's
you got
more-
rid of a lot of the grit.
It's more a live action adaptation of the cartoon,
Kind of,
Yes, that's
yeah.
a better way to describe it.
which I also felt about this most recent one, which I don't think you've seen.
No,
the
I saw 3.
Frozen
That was
Empire.
We watched that,
And
in
a few
theaters
people
together.
online had said that it felt like a live action episode of the cartoon. Like it's got that
Yeah.
sort of, the villain kind of has the sort of, it's the same kind of like monster of the week type villain.
Yeah,
Even though the stakes are always high, but like in every episode they're high. It's like the world's always going to end. Right?
Yeah.
That's sort of the thing.
it's the ultimate stake.
It's the ultimate
The,
stake.
the world is going to
Yeah.
end. The fourth movie, we'll go into that in a little bit later. But
The
yeah,
second
it was,
movie, I mean, I was excited to see it, but it had already, like, I would have been more excited to see it 2 or 3 years earlier.
yeah,
Because, and we were talking about this before we started rolling. I think kids that grew up with it had already, 5 years is a long time between 2
Mhm.
movies if you're a little kid.
I mean, it's not even the 80s anymore.
Yeah.
Based on your
You're right,
Kind
based
of.
on
Yeah, based on
Yeah.
my, it is this sort of its own little like aesthetic, like 89 looks different than 84. Like it,
Totally,
like
yeah.
a lot.
It almost doesn't feel. You're totally right. It almost doesn't feel.
Right, and so
80s.
there's a bit of that. They made some choices with some of the effects, like Slimer looks very different.
Yeah, very different. Yeah.
And
They started leaning a bit more on digital effects.
it's a
At that
little
point,
bit,
too.
yeah. There's a little bit of that, and like, yeah, just some like kind of goofier bits, like Slimer's driving the bus,
Yeah,
right, and like Louis
couple-
Tully has to take the bus to the museum.
That one scene where they're pretending to be construction workers is very funny.
That was pretty
that's
funny.
great.
That scene's
The-
great.
No, and that to me is the like, set the camera up, let
Yo.
these guys, work within a
It
loose
felt-
framework
it
of
almost
script.
felt
but
like
it felt
it was
like it could have
an
been,
SNL skit or something like that.
Totally.
That's what it felt like.
Yeah.
to me.
just the cop keeps coming back, and they have to keep coming up with more ludicrous stories of why they're.
to stop digging?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's really good. There was also so they took the smoking out, but also the innuendo. A lot of that sexual innuendo
Sure.
stuff that was in the first one, and the sexual tension with Dana Barrett and stuff like that. That was also.
I'll go to Dana Barrett's apartment and check her out. I'll go check out Dana Barrett's apartment. Yeah, oh, there's a little.
Well, that's the bedroom. Nothing ever happens in there.
Yeah.
What a crime. Man, so many good lines. I wanted to talk a little bit about the cast. the new cast in the new movie. So Vigo the Carpathian, Vigo von Homburg. Now, Jeff, you have German roots, so Deutschendorf. Would that be Deutschendorf? So Vigo von Homburg Deutschendorf was his actual name, that's the character's name.
Isn't that like German? Like Deutsch?
Yeah,
Deutschland is
Hamburg. I mean, Hamburg is a city in Germany, but
so interestingly,
the actor's German, I think.
I believe so. He was in Die Hard. The first Die Hard is one of the.
Oh, is he?
Yeah, he's a minor one.
The only thing I've seen him in is a movie that nobody knows, and now I can't remember the name of.
I don't even know it.
It's Sam Neill and John Carpenter, mid-90s, and it's
John Carpenter. Wow.
It's a very like Lovecraftian kind
Is
of
it the space one with Sam Neill?
Mouth of Madness.
Oh, Mouth of Madness.
Yeah.
Oh, the Mouth of Madness. Wow. Yeah, that's a crazy one.
And he's the author.
I thought Sam Neill was the author.
No, Sam Neill's the investigator that's trying to find the author.
Oh, interesting.
I think now I got to fact check myself. But
Okay.
yeah, I think I remember seeing that and being like, no, sorry. He's not the author. He's just a guy that's in the town.
Okay.
It's Jürgen Prochnow or something that's the author. But like, no, the Vigo the Carpathian's like one of the guys that's in the like
That's
weird
funny.
town that they get to.
So when we were watching the movie, Josh, you and I were joking about, because you're like, wow, he's pretty much like Rasputin. And I think I was like, yeah, a little bit, but also with Vlad the Impaler.
Yeah, he's a little bit of both.
Apparently, literally, that's what they base it on. Those two. He was
those were
Rasputin and Vlad the Impaler.
That's really
It was
funny.
perfect. So the name, however, Vigo von Homburg Deutschendorf, is a mix of von Homburg, which is the actual actor's last name, and Deutschendorf, the twins that played Oscar in the movie. So it was one baby, but often in Hollywood
Sure.
they use twins because
Yeah,
they can only
there's
have them out for so many hours.
labor laws. Yeah.
Yeah. So their last name was Deutschendorf. So they just like kind of as an homage to the two,
Just
they
kinda-
made that his last name.
That's really funny, actually.
He was from the he was from Carpathia, which was the name of the ship that saved the survivors from the Titanic, also in the film.
Also in the movie.
Yeah.
With
And-
Cheech Marin in that
Yeah,
scene.
at the docks.
Better late than
late
never.
than never.
I just don't. Why? Why is he there?
You know what?
It might have been one of those things where, he's like on the studio talking to somebody, and somebody's like, "Hey, do you want to just like film a
he was
shot?"
like he
for-"
was just he was on the ground.
He was on the grounds
Well,
that
that
day,
one wasn't
or-
even grounds. That was like sound studio.
Yeah,
Because the
that's like-
shot is literally just them in the booth. That doesn't need to be on.
Yeah,
But he was just like in the area and so
Yeah.
was like, hey, you
yeah.
wanna...
It was probably somebody was like a buddy like,
Yeah.
"Hey, do you want to be in a Ghostbusters movie?" He's like, "Yeah, sure."
Yeah,
Like,
what's my line? So Wilhelm von Homburg, who played Vigo, all of his lines were dubbed over.
Yeah,
so what we
very
hear-
poorly.
and you can tell
very poorly.
the voice is Max von Sydow.
oh, interesting.
Yeah. And when during the initial screening, when Wilhelm was watching, he didn't know that his voice was going to be voiced over. He walked out of the theater
Oh,
yeah.
because he was pretty
That's a
pissed,
bummer, yeah.
understandably. He's like, I'm going to kill millions of people in Carpathia. Yeah.
That's brutal. He was just a pretty face, I guess.
It's like the guy who played Darth Vader
No,
didn't know that he was going to get his voice replaced.
yeah,
by
I've
James
actually
Earl Jones.
heard, I've seen video where it's his voice, and it just doesn't have the resonance.
No, he's got. It's not a low voice, but it's not James Earl Jones, and he's British. Yeah, it doesn't quite. Resonates.
Yeah, it really doesn't. I mean,
but
they
no, that'd
chose-
be a bummer that they just didn't tell him. Like,
That's the thing, is like you think they would,
At least let him
tell
know.
you.
Like, hey, we're changing your voice. Sorry, man.
especially like you don't want to find out in the theater. Like you bring your family, it's like that. Why do you sound?
I'm
like
sure
that?
it's one of those things where like by the time it got to that decision, there wasn't anyone there that like even had like interacted with the guy and like thought
Yeah.
to tell
I
him.
had no way to contact him
Yeah,
or whatever,
that kind
right?
of thing. So
Well, so in the first movie, what's the guy that plays Winston? I can't remember the actor's name, but he was originally his part was supposed to be a lot bigger, and he didn't understand why all of his parts were getting cut. And Ramus went up to him and took him aside, and he was like, "Look, this is Hollywood," because that was his first big movie.
Ernie Hudson.
Ernie Hudson,
That
thank
was
you.
his first big movie.
It was his first kind of
Oh.
big movie, and he was like, "What's happening? I don't get this." And Harold Ramis took him aside and said, "This is Hollywood. None of this is personal. It has nothing to do with you. Don't try not to take it personally." And he said that helped. So similar thing for this guy, but
It is weird in the first movie for a main character to show up so late in the movie.
well, the idea with his character was he was supposed to be us.
Yeah, he's the everyman. He's the fish out of
everyman.
water. He's the like,
our
explain
eyes,
this to me.
yeah.
But it just happened so late in the movie.
It did, and it wasn't originally. He was supposed to be much earlier in like the first act, but they brought him in like partway through the second act. So I said Oscar, the baby, Dana's baby, was played by twins. Those twins, fun fact, are the nephews of John Denver.
No.
And John Denver's actual name is Henry John Deutschendorf Jr. It's not
Interesting.
Denver. Isn't that? I had no idea.
Interesting.
Denver, Germany.
Yeah, like same thing, right?
I think the babies was another thing that I think put me off with the second movie. Was it like it
Yeah.
starts with a little bit like it's a little bit of a bummer. It's like, okay, Venkman and Dana like didn't end up with each other after the first movie.
Yeah.
And now she's got like a baby and like there's that and like I don't know, it just the whole thing just felt like a little bit, I don't know, just weird and off.
Yeah. It was a little.
Those are, I mean, it's always tough with, and the fact that like the Ghostbusters were basically bankrupt and like had moved on and
It was very sad. and
yeah,
kinda-
like it's just
yeah.
like it's like, I don't know, you look at something else, like if it had been made today, the sequel would have started with them in the middle of a huge battle. And then they all come back to they're like, okay, we got another monster, and like, it's like another Stay Puft kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of how.
Or they would have shown the downfall. Like they did something in that big fight, and that now the city sues them and they go out of business, and it shows that decline. And then you get to go back up with
Right.
them.
Yeah.
I do get that you need somewhere for that story to go.
For sure.
So that was kind of their climbing out of the pits.
But
again,
yeah, and I think, I mean, I guess the other option that you could have done is, for a sequel is the, now we're interpersonally tearing ourselves apart because we're rock stars almost kind of thing, right? And so like, I'm glad they didn't go that route as
Oh,
well,
me
but
too.
they did a little bit, right?
You don't want to
like,
watch mom and dad fight.
No.
So Eugene Levy they actually filmed his parts in the movie. He was the head of the asylum that they get sent to,
Oh, okay.
but they cut him out.
I think I've seen some of those deleted scenes.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that would be cool. And then not in the movie, but an SNL connection. As part of the press tour, the cast went on to Oprah, and there is a scene where Oprah is talking to the cast, and it pans the audience, and Chris Farley is there. He's got like a sleeveless classic Chris Farley t-shirt on, and he's just kind of young, and it's very interesting.
Very weird.
Yeah. Next section I call Dead People for Kids, where we talk about the cartoon, toys, and video games. With the success of the first movie, they made a cartoon, The Real Ghostbusters. It ran from 1986 to 1991. Did you guys? Well, I mean, you were negative, however years
10.
old when it came out.
8 when the cartoon came out.
-8.
-8.
Yeah, I guess because I would have been 6. Did you watch it?
Oh,
Jeff? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was like Saturday morning cartoon.
And that was peak. Yeah, that was peak kind of cartoons and toys era.
Yep.
And I had both. For me, my main toys at the time were Transformers.
Oh yeah.
But 86 was also when the Transformers movie came out, and if you were a Transformers fan and you were 6 years old, that movie made you
devastating.
cry. That movie absolutely made
It's
you
sad.
cry. Yeah.
Especially if you've been watching the cartoon for
years,
3
and and so I think I'd moved a bit away from really being into Transformers, and so Ghostbusters kind of filled that void a bit.
Yeah.
I didn't have as many toys, and
I did. They weren't. I mean, so the thing with Transformers toys is the toys were everything.
they were the
That
whole
was
thing.
Absolutely, like they were so amazing. I had a robot. He was a Decepticon. He was a robot that would transform into a locomotive and then also into a space
Astro
shuttle.
Train.
Yeah, Astro Train.
I have him.
Do you have?
I
Astro
had
Train?
Astro Train.
I love my favorite though. Like the Constructicons.
Devastator.
Devastator.
I think I had him as well.
Oh, I wish I had him. Him and
I don't have him anymore, but I did.
Omega Supreme.
I always wanted him.
The space
He
station.
turned. He turned into like a launch pad
with a rocket.
with a rocket, but he had the like rails on his back for like the train track that got the rocket to the launch pad. Like it was nuts. Anyways,
Yeah, so
different episode.
Ghostbusters toys weren't that.
They were not.
They were. I mean, they were pretty cool.
Are we doing a Transformers episode? Because I feel like
we will.
you and I
be.
both.
We will eventually do
really like
Transformers. I
Transformers.
already know the commander that's going to be for the deck.
Yeah,
and
it's
stuff,
Optimus Prime.
but- Yeah, Optimus Prime.
Isn't Transformers owned by like the toys are owned by
Hasbro. Yeah.
and Wizards is owned by Hasbro.
They already released. They did some
Oh, have
actual.
they?
They did a crossover.
Oh, okay.
It
Yeah,
wasn't
there's
like a full
5
set.
cards or something.
No,
like
it was
that.
more. There was. I want to say like 12
Oh, okay.
cards, ish. But they released it in a set as just like bonus cards. They didn't do a full set. And an interesting fact. This isn't Transformers related, or this isn't Ghostbusters related, but they couldn't use the word transform on the card, so they used a different term for it.
Yeah, I forget what word did they use.
I can't
Robo
remember.
Change.
Change-O Robot. Change-O-Bot.
Nailed it.
They actually spelt out and
Perfect.
used that.
It is a pretty good. You've practiced that clearly.
I'm pretty good at that.
Yeah,
I'm not
that's
good
good.
at a lot of things, but
that one is the
That's
Transformers.
where
though.
my money's
That's
gonna
the
be
peak.
made.
Yeah.
So interesting.
Ghostbusters toys.
I remember, so the toys for Ghostbusters, I had Ray stands, and we talked briefly before about the Buster
The
guns.
swirly.
The swirly. It looks like it's a
Yeah, so to explain to everyone else, this is the proton beam that the Ghostbusters packs project.
the things you're not supposed to cross.
The things you're not. So this would be like the energy beam that's
Yeah.
getting sent out, but it was just a little bit of plastic, but it was like curved and
Yeah,
like kind of
imagine-
chaotic.
Imagine if you took a
Frozen
piece of
spaghetti.
and you made it into like an S curve.
Yeah, and so it wasn't perfectly spiral, but it was just kind of like loosely, like a little lightning bolt that
You would
was like
spin
kind of like
the bottom
fixed.
end of it.
And you at the back of it, you would spin, and so it would rotate in place, and it would kind of look like it was just flailing all over, which is kind of as
Yeah.
good as you were gonna get.
So I had that. I wish I had the Slimer. The Slimer was really cool, but I ended up getting. So they had years of toys, but there was these 2 ghosts, and one on the bottom was just legs and a giant mouth,
I had that,
and then the top
and
one
then
was
the
the
top
eye.
one was the
And they
eyes.
squirted water.
Yeah,
You could put water in it, and it was great. Yeah,
there
that
was in Ghostbusters Afterlife, I think there was.
Yeah.
it's in
the top part, anyways, comes
Yeah.
flying out. I remember seeing that, and we're like, that's just like the toy.
I looked it up because I was curious, but I didn't have any Ghostbusters toys. But I always heard of these line of toys that were based on the real Ghostbusters, the cartoon.
Yeah.
They're called Fright Features, and they were the main 4 characters plus the secretary, so 5 characters. And the whole gimmick was that they would like you would press a button on the back and they would like transform.
Their jaw would like I think I actually had Egon of that. now
Yeah,
that I
his
think
jaw
about it.
would
His
drop.
jaw
But the other
dropped
ones
from his chest.
their like heads would come up and
like they were
Yeah.
super frightened, and they were just like
Yeah.
cartoonishly
The eyes would
frightened.
bug
Yeah,
out.
and they each came with like a little ghost and stuff.
Yeah, and the other franchise that kind of did that with their toys was Beetlejuice. Beetlejuice toys also did like you press a button and then they turn into a horrific thing.
Yeah, they and those are like the most famous toys from what I can tell.
Yeah,
Those
yeah.
were the ones that. Yeah, those ones.
Which one? Oh,
I
you got
found a picture of it
Yeah.
here. On my,
of so now with the cartoon, I remember being very confused because Filmation, being that 1984 the Ghostbuster movie was so successful, and they still own the rights, they just gave permission for them to use it, but they still own the rights to the Ghostbusters, that they
in the context of a show.
so they decided to, in 1986, make their own version of the cartoon to kind of hop on the bandwagon.
Right on
of
the
that.
coattails
Yeah.
of because they had the rights. Why not?
Yeah, exactly. They're like, well, this is successful.
and
let's
it's
do our-
bonkers. We
It is
talked about
crazy.
it
There's
a bit
a-
earlier, but
Did we talk about it on record? I can't remember.
We talked about
We
it
talked
just-
about it a bit at the beginning.
So
of
the
recording.
original was like it was two bumbling detectives as they travel the world with their gorilla.
They had a gorilla and a car that was haunted.
Yeah.
I don't
And-
know if the car was haunted in the original series.
No, but I never saw the original series. The cartoon, if I remember, not only the car was haunted. Yeah, they had like a different relationship with ghosts.
It was the sons of the characters from the original, and the same gorilla.
Sure.
Ancient
Very-
Who
gorilla.
wore a hat, if I
Yeah, pink
Yeah.
hat, I think.
and
Pink.
they-
That's
Maybe-
crazy.
they
Oh,
got
he's a
into
woman
this
gorilla.
like
Oh.
the car was also this like 1920s
It's a little buggy.
yeah
A
car.
jalopy. It kind of reminded me of Archie's car.
Yeah, like it was a real classic old school
Yeah.
like open top car. But there was a ghost that possessed the car, and its face was on
On the front of it.
the front
and
of
it would
and
transform into like a super fast.
yeah, it
car.
could transform the car, and so like the car was haunted. But I think that they lived in like a big old mansion,
Right.
and there was some sort of weird like Rube Goldberg slide system that they like. Not the fire pole, because they couldn't use that, so they had this like weird thing where they like, and it dropped them into the car, and then they drove off and did stuff. I don't remember really anything else about the show though. Like,
Yeah, well, so I remember because they kind of released that, not in spite of the Ghostbusters, but they were like, let's make money off of this. Meanwhile, our version of the Ghostbusters that we know, the 84 movie, they wanted to do a cartoon. So they ended up having to call theirs the real Ghostbusters.
It was a little bit in spite because originally Filmation went to Columbia because they heard that they wanted to make a cartoon. So Filmation went to them like, "Hey, we'll make the cartoon for you." Columbia was like, we're good actually." So
Oh,
they went
interesting.
with DIC, Dick, and Deke. Sorry, they went with Deke, and Filmation made their own in spite of it.
So
Yeah.
Filmation had no Deke.
They had they were Dekeless.
Yes, that's true. This
studio
company
has no D.
has no Deke. It's interesting too because in the real Ghostbusters, season 1, episode 1, the episode is called I think it's Ghosts Are Us, and it's these 3 ghosts that open a ghostbusting company, and the real Ghostbusters have to show the world that they're a false ghostbusting company. So the episode 1 is just shade.
Just super meta.
Just like,
amazing.
yeah, we're the real Ghostbusters. That is Dekeless.
Yeah, she answers the phone, being like the secretary, would be like, "Hey, it's us, the real Ghostbusters."
Yeah, nice. That was pretty good. I'll do the transformer noise. You do that
Perfect.
voice.
Yeah, I remember. I didn't understand the confusion. I knew what Ghostbusters were. I knew that the Filmation one wasn't, but it was also called the Ghostbusters. So by extension, I kind of had to like it.
Yeah.
Which I think is probably what they were counting on a little bit. But also like I wouldn't have gone so far as to get toys from or anything.
I don't even know
because it did have toys and comic books. Like it ran
they
for
really?
it ran for like I said I checked, it ran for 65 episodes, it ran for
Wow.
2 seasons.
So obviously
It had toys. You could get the Ghost Buggy. You could get comic books. They
Yeah.
had the whole thing. It just wasn't as big.
Now there was Jeff. I think you had mentioned you wanted to talk some more about toys for Ghostbusters.
Oh, so you talked about the sort of 2 stacked ones, and I was just looking through some pictures of ones. There was another one that I had. It had like a kind of, it was purple, kind of blob like most of, like it didn't have, it had arms I think, and then just kind of like a kind of formed into like a tail.
Okay.
But it had 2 small eyes and like a normal face, kind of scaled down pretty small for the thing, and then 1 giant eye that was sort of above. But you could like step on it or like pound it with your fist, and the eye would fly out.
Oh yeah, I do. I remember.
And it was
that. I
attached
didn't
to like
have
a
it, but
string, maybe,
yeah.
or maybe it wasn't. I don't remember. It should have been.
Yeah, I think it was just like a ping pong ball. Just
Yeah,
flew
it was
across the room.
basically just a ping pong ball painted like an eye.
Yeah.
And it would go flying out, and like that was hilarious and great. But I also had a Ghostbusters board game. Now there's since been a different Ghostbusters board game that I think has come and gone. That's probably playability wise a better board game. But this thing was, it's a flat board, but you had to build up this sort of 3D structure.
Okay.
And if I remember correctly, there were sort of 2 flat pieces of cardboard that kind of slotted into each other to form a sort of X, and you put that down on the board and kind of clipped it to the board, so it quartered the board into 4 rooms.
Right.
And there were little doorways cut in them, and you had to go from room 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 following this little path. And it was very much like we were talking like Snakes and Ladders or Candyland or something, where you're just rolling and moving. You're not making a lot of decisions. So in that term, it's not like overly fun. But in each room, there was some zone of that room that was sort of dangerous. And after everyone rolled, you had to put this, I think it was like a little marble, or it might have been like a little skull, in the top of this plastic structure, and it would roll down and it would pick randomly one of the 4 rooms to fall into, and it would cause this really small like mousetrap Rube Goldberg kind of thing where in one room it would like hit the suit of armor and the axe would come down and hit players that were in the
80s loved Rube.
This is incredibly similar to another game I used to play. Same concept. It was like you're climbing up a haunted mansion, and you were like climbing like a multi-tiered haunted mansion, and after everyone rolled, you would roll a pinball down, and it would...
Well, that sounds like Fireball Island.
It's very, very Fireball Island. Same
Fireball
concept, where it'd roll a pinball down, and then it would... There were a bunch of like, there was a one floor where...
I think Indiana Jones,
It
I think
really
Raiders of the
had
Lost
a-
Ark really kicked something off with that giant ball rolling down.
and it would
right?
roll down,
Yeah.
then it would like, if you were standing in the wrong spot, you would just get like knocked down to
Totally.
the start, and you have to go over
And
it
that was,
again.
and I can't remember, but there was, I think you were in like a big, because there was like a suit of armor, so you were probably in some big fancy old house,
Right.
and there was, I think, the kitchen, and then you had to make your way, and then the final, you had to make your way up the stairs, and at the top there was like the trap, like the Ghostbusters trap with the yellow and black kind of diagonal lines, and you had to close that, and that was also the lid to the thing that you put the like ball into.
Okay.
And that was how you won, was
That's
you
cute.
like stopped this thing from
Interesting.
happening. And I remember playing it, and it was always like, it was really boring if you weren't getting hit or hitting other people, because you were just like, I moved 3. Like there wasn't anything else. There weren't cards.
You could go through the whole game just rolling the dice.
Yeah, and it was exciting to be like knocked out by
'Cause something happened.
something, but it
Yeah.
was so rare that kind of happened that the game wasn't great, but
Yeah.
it was fun from like we would just like set players up in the zones and then just like see what would happen. Like nobody by the end, like we just weren't playing the game. We just wanted to, it was like Mousetrap. Like the whole game, you actually have to like slowly build the mousetrap, but all you ever wanted was just to do the mousetrap.
I just want to do the mousetrap.
So that, and I feel like it lived in a box with all of my Ghostbusters toys,
Okay.
which weren't too many, but like in my head somehow like I needed to have them all out if I was playing the board game. My Ghostbusters toys like needed to
This
be
game
there.
isn't interesting enough. I need some
kind of
accoutrement.
So.
Yeah, fair enough. So all these games, of course, well, maybe not the board game, but like all the toys were brought about by the cartoon. Now there's actually there's a pilot. The intro to the cartoon is pulled from a pilot, which is about 4 minutes long. It's pretty much the length of the Ghostbusters theme song, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. I'll put a link to the intro in the show notes here. Definitely worth a 4-minute watch, but it's basically just Moogly. Moogly is the name.
That's
so
the name
you know
of the
the
guy.
logo Ghost?
Yeah.
His name is Moogly.
Oh,
He has a
really?
name that Reitman and Aykroyd gave him, Moogly. So Moogly, it starts with him like strutting down the street. And that strut was actually an homage to John Travolta in Saturday Night Fever, apparently,
Oh, okay.
because he's like doing like that walk down the street. Just kind of interesting
That's
fact there. I did want to talk about the voices in the show. So for seasons 1 through 2, that's a weird way to say it. Seasons 1 through 2, Peter Venkman was
All the seasons after season 0 and before season 3.
yes. Venkman was voiced by
Lorenzo Music.
Lorenzo
Yeah.
Music, who also famously voiced Garfield.
And
Now,
Bill Murray later did the movie version of Garfield.
in the movie version of Garfield, Bill Murray,
Yeah.
So there's a kind of a
Very
fun-
funny.
Yeah, very
It-
funny.
Well,
link.
they have a similar voice.
They do have that.
And
kind
also,
of-
as a kid, I watched Garfield and Friends. That was a thing that was like, even though it was much older, I would still see it on TV. So I knew Lorenzo Music as the voice of Garfield. So then when I first saw the real Ghostbusters, like, why is Garfield
Right.
the main guy? Because
Yeah,
he's just
totally. It does
he's
sound
one
like
of
it.
those voices who just seemingly just talks because it's his. Yeah, I assume it's just his voice. I don't know
similar
much
to
about
like
it.
the guy that does Archer's voice. You know, he's not putting on a voice. That's just
him. Yeah,
him.
he's
And so when he does that, it's like, oh, that's Garfield.
yeah.
Yeah. Venkman hates Mondays. Venkman in season 3 through 7 was played by Dave Coulier.
Oh, really?
Yeah, from Full House. Yeah, the uncle in the
Alanis
basement.
Morissette's ex.
Alanis Morissette. Yes, famously Alanis Morissette's ex. Egon.
Cut it out.
Egon was played by Maurice LaMarche, who was famously
Oh, yeah.
Inspector Gadget and the Brain from
yeah.
Pinky and the Brain.
Yeah, and does a lot of Futurama and a whole bunch of stuff.
Ray was Frank Welker,
Oh,
who did the voice of Megatron, Galvatron, Soundwave, and also in the Garfield show did the voice of Garfield. So not Garfield and Friends. That's the one that.
Oh,
is
like the
famous.
3D one?
No,
Like
the
the-
Garfield show was a more modern cartoon.
Oh, okay.
I don't think it was 3.
Because there was a really bad 3D Garfield show in like the mid 2000s.
Well, maybe it was. that
maybe
one.
it was that.
Yeah.
That show was awful.
And then Winston, I don't know who played it afterwards, but seasons 1 through 3 was
Arsenio Hall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, it's the seasons after 0 and before 4. In 1997, so this is away from cartoons and games, and toys, and we're starting to look at the video games. So there's kind of two big video. There were some 80s.
I
mean,
had the
real-
Commodore 64
Did you?
Yes.
Activision. It was Activision or EA that did it, and
Activision,
I
I
could
believe.
never even figure it out.
So
Like, it
it's
was-
really famously the first Ghostbusters game, the NES one, is terrible.
Yes, I've heard that.
Famously a very bad NES game.
Like up there with like E.T.
yeah, well, ET is but it's awful.
Yeah.
I watched a playthrough of it. It's like 10 minutes long. And there were actually a lot of Ghostbusters games around that time because
Yeah.
there wasn't just one Ghostbusters one game. There were two. And then there were different versions, all the multiple consoles.
Right.
Ghostbusters 2 had a North American version on the NES, and
Wow.
it had a totally separate version in Europe and Japan, done
Interesting.
by the guys who did HAL, which were the guys that did Kirby.
Oh, like Kirby's Dream Land. those
Yeah,
ones?
all the OG Kirby games done
were
by them.
were the two Ghostbusters 2 games at all similar?
I mean, they followed the same story, but they were totally different games.
Interesting.
Totally, they were just separate games.
Huh.
The same name, just like two cracks at the original Ghostbusters 2 that we got in North America is like okay, it's like a fine game, whereas the one in Europe and Japan seemed like a pretty sweet game,
Interesting.
as well as like there was a
That
number
would
of
have been NES, I guess, right?
all NES,
Yeah, yeah.
and then there wasn't really anything on the Super Nintendo. There was some Game Boy stuff, and like weirdly, there were a lot of pachinko Ghostbusters stuff, but that's
What's pachinko? Sorry.
it's like it's
Japanese.
so in
pinball
Japan, gambling is illegal.
Right.
So you go to a pachinko parlor, which is you get a big thing of metal balls, and you do it's like pinball,
Yep.
and you just send the balls in, and they
Okay.
kind of play itself. But you get tokens from that, and then you take it across the street to a separate place, and you trade those tokens in for money.
Oh,
So it's not
interesting.
gambling because it's two separate
businesses.
So you're not gambling for money; you're gambling for tokens. Then a separate business will buy those tokens.
It's a
for-
game called Loopholes.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a lot of those.
The NES version was a port of the Commodore 64
Yes.
game.
Yeah.
So
and
a
that was why it was so
generation
bad.
loss.
Yes, and that was so
from-
bad.
And the
actually.
Commodore 64 one was tough to figure out.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting.
There is also I don't know if you have it in your notes. There was another cartoon in '97.
Really?
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
so
they
the-
had the
So the Extreme
that's
Ghostbusters.
it, the Extreme Ghostbusters.
So
Oh, yes.
So
In
real
97?
Ghostbusters ended in '91, and then there's a 6-year gap. And much like from Ghostbusters 1 to 2, the Extreme Ghostbusters takes place after ghosts have been, there's no more ghosts, and the Ghostbusters have split up.
Okay.
And now Egon is the only one stuck around, so he still lives in the firehouse. He maintains like the ghost containment unit, and he teaches like a ghost class, a ghost hunting, whatever, a paranormal class at the local college.
Okay.
Ghosts come back, and he gets 4 of his students, his college students in his class, to be Ghostbusters.
So it's almost like a reboot.
It's very like it's like still a kids show, but a lot more edgy, a lot darker.
Right.
Because it's 97.
97. The like one of the main characters is this like goth girl who is the only thing that anyone knows from that show because she's like a goth girl in the 90s.
So it's like Ghostbusters of the Next Generation.
Kind of, yeah. And but it only ran for 1 season.
Okay.
Ran for 97 to 97.
Goth girl couldn't hold the weight.
Apparently wasn't very popular, didn't do well, but it was sort of like it was their attempt at like rebooting the Ghostbusters thing entirely, because Egon was the only thing from the OG series. I mean,
fair enough, but for me anyways, maybe that was the idea, was like, oh, let's make Ghostbusters not for
that was the idea.
My group.
It was for teens, it was for a new generation.
Those characters. Like those characters
they were the Ghostbusters, yeah. And I think that's a bit of the challenge with
the new ones,
with making, any of the new ones, which I think we'll probably get into.
We will,
shortly.
One of the things I was very surprised, it was 97, which still wasn't that modern. I was surprised the show is very multicultural. It's got like a woman, a person of color, a person in a wheelchair.
97 was
more modern than
figure its stuff out. Yeah.
That's true, but I was surprised, like, oh, hey, look at that. Like it didn't seem like it was just nice to see, reading about the cartoon being like, oh, it was a very like multicultural and like, inclusive.
Oh wait. Hey, I am Asian.
I had Asian friends.
You had Asian friends.
I had Asian friend. Yeah. Half.
Well, that's interesting. In 1997 as well, Dan Aykroyd worked on a script for a Ghostbusters 3 called Ghostbusters 3 Hellbent. Now this is mostly rumors, but Chris Farley was rumored to be involved.
I remember those rumors and hearing the sort of development hell rumors of movies, and like, oh, Chris Farley is attached to a Ghostbusters movie.
Yeah, I'll put a link in the show notes. There are some actual treatments and drafts for Ghostbusters 3 Hellbent, where they go into, the idea was like you go into hell to fight Hades. They had to battle, that was the big boss, was Hades. But some of that actually made its way into the 2009 video game, and that's why I bring it up, which was called Ghostbusters, the video game. And until the newer movies, it actually served as...
It was a good third
entry. Because it was written by Aykroyd and Ramis, voiced by the original cast. All 4 came back.
And it ties in... like Vigo is in it, the hotel from the first movie is in it.
Yeah.
Stay Puft is in it. Slimer's in it. Like it's just...
Well, and the big bad is Ivo Shandor still. It's like...
Yeah, it ties in all of these elements from the lore and the world building that they put so much effort into.
Totally.
And like some of that also, trickles into the cartoon, but I don't think that's considered like canon.
Right.
But this third movie was just like, yeah, it's a good job. And you play a 5th, like you're the new recruit.
The rookie, yeah.
The rookie, right? And so that also would have been a good, if it had been a movie of the sort of, here's the old crew handing it over to the new guy or whatever.
Yeah.
I think it would have been a good movie, but I also really enjoyed it as a video game.
Yeah, it's I haven't quite finished it yet, but I wanted to get a good amount in there. I had mentioned this before recording, but it actually gave me motion sickness because you're
staring at the roof, and
you're staring at the roof, and then it goes from the roof through the floor, then it comes out of this wall over here. It was crazy. It's crazy.
I remember the
great game though.
Portal developers saying one of the hardest things in video games is getting the player to look up.
Yeah, because you're
just so used to scanning the horizon. And when humans walk into a place, they can see the roof.
Yeah, and they look.
Our vision, when it's through the lens of a video game, is limited a bit, right? Like it's cropped a little bit, unless you have like a really crazy field of vision, which then that becomes its own problematic kind of thing, or you're in VR or something like that, right? But yeah, and so getting people to look up is problematic because we just typically don't do it. But if there's ghosts on the roof, you got to look up.
You got to look up. So that did
or painted green peanuts.
Painted green. You got to watch out for those green peanuts. They're the spicy ones. It's wasabi. So it did kind of fill that third movie, that video game filled that third movie hole. But there was actually, and in our next section we'll talk about it, a treatment that never saw the light of day. I'm calling this section the Phantom Flim. It's like film, but you switch I and the L.
But why would
Phantom
you switch?
Limb? Phantom Flim.
Oh, wow. Okay, cool.
It only
They're
gets
getting
better.
worse.
Worse, I mean, yeah.
Yeah,
Jeff, you're kind of familiar with this.
I came across. So this was Max Landis, who is the son of filmmaker Jonathan Landis, who would have been a contemporary of Ivan Reitman. Like he was doing 80s movies. I can't remember all of the films that he did. Like American Werewolf in Paris, I think was one that he did, and
I don't know why I want to say Never Ending Story, but I don't think he actually had
American Werewolf in London, not Paris. Paris was the weird sequel one that came out later. He did the Thriller video.
Ooh, nice.
Yeah, and he's a little bit of a, I think, controversial figure. There was some, I don't know. I don't want to get into it. And I believe Max Landis also had a little bit of controversy around him.
Max was his son.
Max was his son. This was he wrote a movie called Bright. I think it was called.
Is that the one on Netflix?
So Will Smith
with Will Smith?
Yeah.
That movie is awful.
It's not very good.
I like that movie.
Oh, it's bad.
I like the world of that movie.
I like the world of that. I will give you that one.
The actual movie, bad.
I thought I wouldn't even say it's bad. I think it's very medium.
It's very medium
to a fault.
But it was also like one of the most watched things on Netflix. So like people were into it.
Now, at a time when there was nothing else on Netflix.
Yeah, that's also true.
This
I remember
was
watching it.
many
I
years
was staying at my parents' place out of town with my brother, and we were just watching Netflix for lack of anything. Either like a small town in the middle of nowhere, and I'm just like, want to watch this? Like, sure. And it was sort of like, hey, that filled that void.
Yeah.
So
we watched it.
But anyways, Max Landis, when they announced that they were doing the 2016 reboot of Ghostbusters, he published online a treatment of.
Oh yeah, it was like now that they're going to do this.
I had this idea, but it sounds like they're going in a different direction. So here's what my idea would have been. So it's not a full screenplay, but it's also more than just a outline.
Right.
He's got a bit of a frenetic kind of manner to him, but he also casts who he would have wanted.
Yeah.
And then a couple of people like Kumail Nanjiani who made it into the more recent
the
Ghostbusters.
Frozen Empire. Yep.
But yeah, so he had this sort of idea for who he wanted as these characters, but the idea was there were four the world of Ghostbusters had been basically we've busted all the ghosts. But before that happened, Ghostbusting became this really popular thing, and it was franchised out. So every city had a Ghostbusters branch, and there was the New York branch, which was the OG one, and the LA one, and like, Miami and Philadelphia and Chicago. Like they all had their own kind of, but they'd all closed except for the
LA
New York and the LA one.
Okay. Yeah.
And it focused on the New York one. And it was the daughter of Egon.
Okay.
Who was in it primarily so that she could,
which is, I mean, the new one is
and primarily so that she could contact her father. That was why she got into sort of paranormal stuff. And I feel like he had Jenny Slate in mind.
Okay, I can see it.
Which would totally have been fun. And
actually, his daughter Victoria, Harold Ramis's daughter Victoria, kind of looks like Jenny Slate.
Okay,
it's interesting.
And then just a bunch of other people that had sort of reasons for being Ghostbusters in the New York one, and then the LA one was like they'd
It
never
was all
really
for
busted. It was all
show
for
and-
show. They'd show up at like Hollywood events and stuff,
Right.
but like that was about it. And they had Glenn Howerton from
It's Always
Sunny in
Sunny.
Philadelphia as sort of like the head smarmy LA Ghostbuster and then a bunch of stuff. But he tied it in. He had
He does a greasy smile so well.
he does a greasy smile.
Oh
very well.
man.
They had some really fun like stuff with Ivo Shandor from the first movie, and also I guess the third Afterlife.
Yep,
Ivo
yep.
Shandor is in there. He had a neat thing where it starts in 1920, and it's the Dana Barrett's building, and they're doing the rituals to bring about the end of the world.
Okay.
And this one cultist kind of is like, "Hey, like I'm not into this. I don't want to do this anymore." And the other cultists kill him, but that his spirit ends up becoming Slimer.
Oh, interesting.
Which was
Oh,
just,
a
you know, like
background
a
of
fun
Slimer.
little,
That's
like, you know,
funny.
lots of little like backstory.
It
and,
would've
like,
been funny
all
if
of this
he-
kind of.
He showed up. It's like, oh, hey guys.
Yeah.
I didn't know this is what we are doing. I thought there was a free lunch.
I thought, yeah, it's something like that. So
he's food based
it's-
already.
It's a lot of fan service and stuff like that. But it also, I think it's a good treatment, and it would have been a fun movie.
yeah.
I think we'll find there's a link to it somewhere out on the internet.
Yeah.
He posted
try and find that.
he posted it online, and I think he also had like a video where it's just him like selfie cam talking about the treatment and like and so you kind of get his very intense read on like how he would have done it, but you can also just read the text of what he had.
Yeah, I'll see if I can
blogged.
find a link.
But that was at the time I was disappointed that they were rebooting Ghostbusters rather than continuing Ghostbusters,
Yeah.
because I felt like there was enough content that they could have continued a story and not like started.
Well, they created such a fairly deep world, so why
Yeah.
kind of scrap that? I
But-
mean, I will say, so we'll go into the next section now. It's called "Time to Give Up the Ghost?" ? Where we discuss the new movies. That was kind of
That's the best
that's
one
an
so
easy
far,
one.
I think.
I think it's entry level pun. You know what I mean? It's like not too.
As opposed to the others were all advanced level puns.
Yeah, I'm not doing jazz hands after this one.
You didn't have to explain this one.
Yeah.
Which is good.
So the 2016 version widely panned. A lot of people didn't like it. I didn't. I think that because it was a female cast, it received a lot of negative attention simply because of that.
Sure. There's
but
a
as
lot of
movie, I
there's a
thought it
lot
was
of neck
meh.
beardy internet basement dwellers.
Oh, I thought you
that-
said neck beardy.
No,
Like,
neck beardy.
That was like a term for that kind of person.
No.
No.
That
You're such
were
a Nick
that
beard.
already hated it before they saw anything about it.
Yeah, exactly.
And whatever. I don't really, as you guys know, I personally don't really engage with the internet a lot. So
Mm.
like I was kind of oblivious to all of that, and I saw the trailer and I was like, I'm also one of the few people that really doesn't like I did not like Bridesmaids.
Well,
And
you're not a huge fan of Kristen Wiig.
I'm not a big Kristen Wiig fan. I'm not a big Melissa McCarthy fan.
Yeah.
I love the other two.
Yeah, I did
from
think that
from SNL. Like I think their time on SNL was
Yeah.
they were some of the best players on SNL.
I think I don't know. I mean, it's not really my place to say probably, but they leaned into the black character trope. You know that trope of like I'm loud.
They did in the trailer, and I think
Ah.
that put a lot of people off.
Oh,
But
that
then
was just
she
a
ends up
trailer
being
thing.
the best character of the four of them in
Yeah.
the movie. I thought.
yeah.
But yeah, I was a little bit like, okay, like for me, the my problem is it's kind of, it's the same shtick, the Kristen Wiig, Melissa McCarthy
Yeah.
shtick of like, oh, let's just like sort of awkwardly talk at each other and
Mumble my way out of
mumble and like,
sentences.
oh no, wait, no, you go, oh no, you go, you know, oh, sorry, I thought you were gonna, you know, and it's like that's funny for like 30 seconds, but it doesn't carry a movie for me, and like
Yeah,
I didn't
fair.
like it in Bridesmaids. A million people love Bridesmaids. Like I'm in the minority, and
You're
I
allowed
get
to
it.
not like a movie.
And
that
so I
you
was
like.
like, okay, I saw Bridesmaids a second time because I was like, I must have missed something the first time because everyone was like, it's so good, and I was like, oh, okay, I guess it's just me.
That's fine for you.
And so I kind of went into this a little bit worried, but you know, there were some good, there were some good moments. There was a lot of fan service. Like they had all of the original
was.
living, you know, Ghostbusters, you know, act for a minute in the
and they
movie,
actually
and-
asked. I'm glad they didn't because as it exists. It exists outside of the canon universe.
Mm-hmm.
But they did ask the guy whose name is not Martin Short.
You can do this.
Oh, okay. Wait. What are his initials?
R.M.
Richard Mighty.
Yep.
Is it Richard Mighty?
Yep.
I nailed it. Oh my god! I can't believe
Got
I
it in
remembered
one.
that.
Got it in one.
Rick Moranis.
Oh man, he needs to start acting again so I can remember his name.
He is an absolute treasure.
He is, and a Canadian treasure.
And a
I feel like I
Canadian.
should know his name better. Rick Moranis was asked if he wanted to come back in a cameo, kind of as his character. He thought it just been too long. He also, after the Ghostbusters 2, and he saw how that he was not a fan of how Ghostbusters 2 turned out. He'd also, as a lot of people do know, he stopped acting to take care of his kids when his wife passed away.
Yep. Which is just tremendous.
So noble, yeah. And
sad for us because
we don't get
Honey, I Shrunk the Kids was amazing.
Honey,
and
I Blew Up the Kids was still okay.
And Ghostbusters and older people with SCTV memories.
Yeah.
He's just a
He's a
comedic
gem.
treasure.
I know him best from Little Shop of Horrors.
Yeah.
Oh,
that's a
Little Shop of Horrors is
huge.
peak
Yeah.
Moranis.
Yeah.
And Bill Murray's in that as well.
Yes, so
Is he
true.
the dentist? No.
He's the
No, he's
dentist.
the guy-
Martin's the dentist.
Steve Martin's the dentist. He's one of the dental patients.
Oh yeah. Wow.
But he's
I need to watch that again.
Yeah, he's the sadistic one, and
Yeah.
and Steve Martin's trying to inflict pain, but Bill Murray wants it, and so it's not working. Yeah. Anyways,
Rick Mighty, great actor. So he said no. No, not Rick Mighty. Rick is
Moranis, Rick Moranis.
I know. I can't remember.
Dick Mighty. My favorite actor.
Now we're talking.
the famous Canadian actor Dick Mighty. So he said no, and I'm thankful because I'm glad that the 2016 one is out. Not because it's a female cast, I have no issues with that, but just because the movie itself was very medium. Again, strongly medium.
It is. I think it spends way too much time at the beginning of the movie, and this isn't necessarily a criticism of just that movie because I find a lot of modern movies spend a long time in the sort of origin. Like we have to know all of the
first
reasons.
act is like
You
so
watch
long.
the 1984 Ghostbusters. You don't need to know anything. They're scientists that have figured this out, and they're going to go do it.
Well,
We don't need to know the motivation
and
why
this is a non-pre-existing idea.
technology and idea in
and
their-
they
in the
still
world.
don't spend that time explaining it. Now in the new movies, we all understand Ghostbusters, and they still
and it's just so it's this shift in sort of modern film making where they I think just feel the need to tell the audience absolutely everything, and we need to know why everyone's motivation. And like the movies, it's a comedy. Don't make it about that. Make it about other things.
Yeah.
And make it more interesting. So I think they time-wise they could have shifted a bunch of things and spend a lot of times just doing kind of like fart jokes and like, okay, cool. And then there's some visually I thought it was kind of neat, like the way that the ghosts kind of like glow captured a bit of that, because the process in the 80s was I think
an overlay of
it was an
film.
overlay. They were using the Pepper's Ghost technique, which is like a 45-degree angle glass and then an object that's like well lit, and so it bounces off the glass into the camera, but it's partially transparent.
Yeah, interesting.
That goes back like 100 years. That's like a super. If you ever take the Haunted Mansion ride at Disney World, that's they use that in the ride. So you're like looking down onto this like ballroom, and there are these like semi-transparent ghosts
That's so
and you're just like, how? It's like they're actually underneath the track where you can't see them, and you're seeing it bounce off of this 45-degree.
Man, movie magic used to be so
Totally
cool.
like it's and they're using that, but also the glow of that, because I think they were using like maybe like UV light or something to really make them like phosphoresce.
pop. Yeah.
Like Slimer really like glows, and some of the other like they captured that using CG, and I thought that was the 2016 movie did a good job of some of the visuals of the sort of like glowiness like that. I appreciated that. I thought that was well done, and some of that. I didn't really like the villain and his motivation, and then
him turning into Mowgli. I was just like, come on, like this is such a
it was fan service, but also
what fans wanted that.
That's the thing, is like, you've already sort of said we're doing our own thing. This is very much not fan service. If it was, we'd just get the original guys back. Right. And so commit to doing your own thing and making it your own, or do the fan service, but it just seemed like a half measure.
Rowan North, that was the villain's name. Sorry.
Oh wow. Yeah. But yeah, and the set piece at the end, and it didn't come together for me.
Yeah.
Male or female, I think I would have been disappointed either way.
Yeah.
And then I almost ended up having to defend it against people who were like, this is the worst travesty in the history of cinema. And I'm like,
what?
No, it really wasn't. Like, it was
really
actually okay.
That's the thing, is like, I think it's a very solidly medium movie.
Yeah.
That isn't a pan or a boon or a like compliment to it. Is very medium.
Yeah.
That's almost worse.
Yeah, almost.
It is
almost worse.
It is
incredibly in the middle.
pretty forgettable. Like, I forget that it exists sometimes.
I don't.
But I saw it in the theaters. I saw it with a bunch of people, and we all kind of had the same kind of like, nobody was like, oh, this is the worst, but nobody was like, I loved it. It was just kind of like, like, I guess it exists. So for me, the only real disappointing thing was that it felt like it was the end to any future.
Yes. It was like, oh, now we're never going to get it. But thankfully we did. I'm not a huge fan of the two new movies. It's better. So my order of movies is 1, obviously, 2, and you guys had some interesting insight on this 2 versus 3, then 3, then 4, then the 2016 version. I found that the 3 in the like Afterlife and Frozen Empire, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I thought they were okay, but it was like what the errors that they had in Ghostbusters 2, they kind of continued, where they were trying to make it too much of a family film, and I don't know. It just they're fine. I'm glad that it's in the same universe, and it did wrap up some stories, kind of cool, with Harold Ramis actually passing and bringing Egon back to actually defeat Ivo Shandor. So I liked the third one.
I like that, and I know it was tugging on the heartstrings, but like it tugged on the right heartstrings for me, and like I felt wrapped up in that, because it was also like, it's Jason Reitman, it's Ivan Reitman's son. Who kind of had the blessing, and he's in Ghostbusters too.
Yeah, he's the kid that says, I thought you were going to be He-Man.
Yeah, he's the kid that's having the birthday party that they come.
The little
the bratty with the braces.
Yeah.
And so like, he's lived in the world of Ghostbusters in a very unique way since he was a kid, and he's our age. So, it's like it's
sorry. The third one I quite enjoyed. It's not high on my list.
It's not high on the list. I'm the same. I think for me, the third one and the second one are probably, like, if you said, other than the first one, what Ghostbusters movie do you want to watch right now?
Yeah.
I'd probably take Afterlife over the second one.
Yeah,
but
that was the interesting take for
I've
me.
also seen the second one a lot.
Yeah.
Both Steve and I used to work in video stores,
it was on a lot.
And it's a movie that you can throw on, right? That's it's inoffensive, it's visually entertaining, and it's not super boring. So
yeah, there's the thing about 2 is like there's some really hokey. The whole scene where they're like, we need something that gives people hope. That's a sign of.
Yeah,
it's just there's this one, I can't remember the exact word he says.
Something pure.
That's the one.
Yeah,
where Peter Venkman like looks down at the license plate and he goes, something pure.
Yeah,
and you can almost see that Bill hates having to say that line.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
It's
the only good part was when they were using the Nintendo Advantage controller to control
the Statue of Liberty.
Which was very
now
funny.
I think my favorite scene in 2 is the courtroom scene
with the Scoleri brothers.
With the Scoleri brothers and the judge, because that for me is like, that's where the movie comes together. That's where the movie stops being the bummer beginning of the movie.
Ghostbusters are the worst, yeah.
and it's like, hey, we're back. It goes into that.
It 180s very quickly.
Yeah, it goes
this
into
judge literally
Bobby
sentenced
Brown
them.
song and the medley of them trapping the ghost jogger in Central Park and like all of those little fun
So
things.
the ghost jogger, the actor that played that was the actor that was also the Empire State Building, or sorry, the Statue of Liberty.
Oh, neat.
That's really funny.
Yeah. And then Frozen Empire, it's tough, right? Because now that they've done the full arc with the 3 movies of Evo Shandor and Gozer.
Right. They need a different.
Now you have to bring in.
Well, the second movie has nothing to do with Evo Shandor.
No, except he does. So spoiler alert. I mean, obviously, but there's that great scene where he's in the coffin, at the body of Evo Shandor, and then when
In
Gozer,
Afterlife.
yeah, and then Gozer comes up and he's like, "I have created this world for you, so that together," and she literally just rips him in half, and it's like, oh, because it's also J.K. Simmons.
J.K. Simmons.
So
in
you're
the
like,
coffin,
oh,
yeah.
he's gonna have this like big part, and they just
No, I
kill
thought
him off.
that was great. That was a great moment.
I laughed out loud. That
But
was
he's
great.
no in the second, like in Ghostbusters 2, there's no
Oh,
Evo Shandor. It's
true.
It's just Vigo.
That's very true.
But yeah, it was nice because he does seem like he's the. But also like, if they hadn't brought him back and just moved on, like they kind of Afterlife made him like this big thing. And the third, or the video game that was almost a third movie.
Yeah.
Also plays a lot with Evo Shandor. So
It's
he
very
becomes
Evo Shandor,
this
yeah.
sort of like the primary villain.
Yeah.
In a way that maybe did a disservice to the Ghostbusters, because he's not in the cartoon. It managed to just have a different villain every episode, and
Yep.
it was fine.
Yep.
And that's where I was saying I felt like the Frozen Empire felt like it would have been a good like mid-season episode of
Right.
like a show,
You were saying it was
because
like a
there's so
cartoon.
many characters, but that's okay if you've already established them with like 5 or 6 episodes prior.
Yeah.
And then, hey, we've got this like, Monster of the Week
Monster of the Week,
Frozen.
very
And like,
much.
I think it would be a great show. I mean, that's kind of what the cartoon was a Monster of the Week type.
Totally
type
literal
show.
monster of the week.
Yeah. And I think that would be a fun, that's the world they've built now. Like, let's inhabit it. And you can have, start the show or start the TV show with like a cameo from like Bill Murray or whatever, but get a bunch of non-movie star actors
Yep.
to just be in a TV show being Ghostbusters. We got the budget to do the effects and everything. And then give me some more of the world. Like, I want to hear about what's in Tobin's Spirit Guide and
Yeah.
like all of these, like the fun little things that they've trickled throughout the show,
Yeah.
and give me a 10 episode season or something.
That would have been very cool.
But I felt like that was at the level of like, oh, that was a good episode, but like
Well,
it
and
wasn't I wanted to go out and spend, $50 to get a couple of tickets to go see the
When
movie.
you and I, we went and saw it in the theaters. Jeff. Yeah. And when we came out, we both.
You got this, you can't see it here, but we got this Slimer popcorn bucket that's really,
It's my deck box.
it's
well, it holds
unsettling.
the deck box. So
Amazing.
I have the Ghostbusters deck has a pink deck box because it's meant to be Slimer's tongue. When you put it in the, I kind of want to paint it to like have the tongue line down
Beautiful.
the middle.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And it's from Ultra Pro. Not a
Sponsor us,
sponsor.
please.
But we had talked about when we got out of the movie that we both felt like it was a movie that could have. It almost seemed like they were going in a direction where it was like, oh, maybe we shouldn't just trap these ghosts, because they have that Holly
Right.
or whatever her name is. There's a ghost that like has a
Some-
personality. She's
Yeah.
in human-esque form, and she's like, oh, she basically missed her chance to pass on. Now she's kind of stuck here. And I thought they were going to go into this like, we've been doing it wrong this whole time. Instead of like just trapping these and treating them like they're just
Right.
scum, we should actually be helping them. So instead of
Help them move on.
busting, we're
Yeah. But
ghost
then they
helping.
didn't really go with that
It
thread.
felt like they were going to, and then they just went, nope. And yeah, I don't know. And they played with like the granddaughter maybe being gay, but they just like, they almost baited
They pulled
you.
back a bunch of stuff.
They baited you into feeling like, oh, cool, they're actually going to make her character gay maybe. And they're like, nope. It's like, did you do that on purpose to make me think you were going to be cool about it? I don't know.
They
It just
sure
felt,
did.
it felt a little weird.
And it also felt like maybe it was studio notes. Maybe somebody got cold
that's it.
feet.
It felt like it was.
Frozen Empire, cold feet.
Yes, Frozen Empire Cold Feet. Yeah.
Yeah, it felt like, I mean, they crammed so much into it. So
Yeah.
I imagine that somebody was sitting there with like a 3.5-hour script, and they're like, guys,
Yeah.
what are we cutting from this?
Yeah.
But it felt like a shame that because there were pieces left in it that I'm like, you could have cut that. Like there was some pacing stuff that didn't super work for me. But yeah, that's where it felt like you could have made this a 1-hour episode if you took out of all of the establishing character stuff and put those in previous episodes.
Yeah.
And didn't have all of the like, we need 11 Ghostbusters by the end of this movie.
Yeah.
11.
Oh yeah, there's like everyone, because it's like all of the new people, all of the like scientist people that are part of the new thing, and then like all the original Ghostbusters, and it's just
They
like
show up. Oh, and
Paul Rudd
Camille-
and the
Kumail Nanjiani.
Nanjiani,
And his grandmother was a Ghostbuster.
and just like, yeah, all of this stuff, and it's just like they're just cramming a lot into one movie. But I think it would have been a good Monster of the Week mid-season episode of like a 13
of a Ghostbusters TV show.
Of a Ghostbusters TV show. And it didn't feel like, that's the other thing, is like they've saved the world so many times that I don't feel like the stakes of like, oh, the world, and it's like, oh, okay, cool, the world's
the other thing with that is like, how many times is the mayor or the city going to be like, oh, you're frauds? It's like, read a book.
Yeah.
Watch a news broadcast from 2 years ago. Like, what? We saved the world.
There was a little bit of like an alt-right like conspiracy, like the Ghostbusters never existed kind of thing in the movie, or was
Which one? Which movie?
in Frozen Empire? Was there something like that?
I don't remember that.
Maybe that was just us and the way back being like, they should have done something like that.
Yeah,
but I
we
feel
talked
like
a lot about a should-has.
I think there was something about like there was some sort of like alt-right ish kind of character that's like didn't even believe the Ghostbusters existed or something.
Yeah.
Like that, so.
I will say that one thing that is...
I liked that William Atherton was the mayor, though, because he was the guy who was the
Peck.
EPA guy.
Yeah.
Was reading a thing earlier.
Mayor Peck.
So at the end, he gets a bunch of marshmallow dumped on him.
Of the first movie.
Yeah. It was 75 pounds of shaving cream.
That's gotta hurt a little bit.
So he looked at this and he's like, that whole thing, like, what's heavier, like a pound of feathers or a pound of lead? It's like, it's still a pound.
Yeah.
Right. And so he's like, yeah, 75 pounds. He's like, yeah, but it's shaving cream. I'm like, yeah, but it's still 75 pounds. and so they had a stunt guy go and do a test, and they dropped 75 pounds of shaving cream on him, and it flattened him. And they were like, okay, we're going to do half.
Yeah.
And then he was like, all right, now I'm happy.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, good on him for calling it out.
But I'm glad that, like little things like that, like they brought him back and now he's the mayor. So like, okay, I get it. He's always hated the Ghostbusters.
Them.
So like,
that's
sure.
a good call. That is a good way to have that. How do you do that? Like, oh, we don't like you.
Yeah.
You've saved our butt how many times? One of the things that is a through line through all of the movies, in fact, one of my favorite Paul Rudd lines in one of the two new movies is like, it's just, Bustin' makes me feel good. Is the last section here where we have to talk about the song. The section I call I Want a New Song. And if you know the legal issues
yeah, that's good.
that came with the song, so we're talking about Ghostbusters, the theme song by what's his name?
Ray Parker
Jr.
So I feel like everybody knows this.
Everyone knows this song.
Yeah.
It's a perennial favorite. It comes out as a bit of a Halloween song now.
Yeah. It rears its head again.
Written in like, it was either 3 days or 3 weeks. Written in an unbelievably short
writing a
amount
song
of
in
time.
3 weeks is still pretty good, but I think it was closer to 3 days.
It's probably 3 days, yeah. But yeah, it's I Want a New Drug is the Huey Lewis and the News song.
Yeah,
it sounds a lot like.
Well, so they asked Huey Lewis to do the theme song for Ghostbusters. He turned it down because he had already done 2 soundtrack songs. One for, I can't remember what the first one was, but the second one was for Back to the Future.
But that came out later though.
Oh, did it? Or no, he was already
probably
slated to write
already,
it. And he didn't want to be like a soundtrack guy, so he said no. But they actually used his song "I Want a New Drug" as a placeholder in the movies. and like while they were waiting for the actual song. And to this day, when I hear "I Want to Do Drug" come on, it starts with that which if I was to do, I could have just been doing the Ghostbuster intro. So I can see it. Now I don't know the ins and outs of it. I think it was settled out of court.
I think it's Huey Lewis gets 17 cents every time you hear Ghostbusters, the song.
Really?
I think it's something like that where
there was also so many years later Huey Lewis talked about it in like a behind the music documentary and broke NDA and then had to give a bunch of money to Ray Parker Jr.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so he got his money back anyways.
Yeah.
That's so
There's
funny.
a great Key and Peele skit where Jordan Peele is playing Ray Parker Jr.
Yeah.
And it's in the style of one of those infomercials of like, 2 CDs or 3 compact or 2 cassettes, 3 compact discs kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's Ray Parker Jr. and it's all of his rejected songs for other movies of the 80s. And it's excellent.
Okay,
like
I'll
it's
try
the
to
only,
find a link.
it's the only kind of Ray Parker Jr. thing that I don't
Yeah.
know much about the guy, and I don't think he's done much other than that song.
Yeah, this was his first big hit, and dear Lord, was it a hit?
Well, because
my
he
God.
was with a group. I can't remember the name of the group he was with, but he had
Huey Lewis and the News.
He was the estranged member of Huey Lewis and the News.
the rejected keyboard player.
but he had written some notable songs with this other group, and it started to go solo, and that's kind of so it was his first solo big hit, but he had some hits before, and that's what gave him the clout to get the role, or get the job. But I did want to bring up the music video. So this music video is crazy.
Directed by Reitman.
Was it directed by?
Directed by Reitman.
And it's that classic song for a movie music video where they were probably doing it like on an off day or like between shoots because like they've got them in costume like Bill Murray.
So there's two distinct
yes
stories kind of happening. There's all the stuff in New York, like Times Square, like Bill is breakdancing in Times Square they're spinning him. But then there's this other weird storyline. I guess there's kind of 3. There's this other weird storyline where there's this beautiful 80s woman, and she's in her house in her nightgown, and Ray Parker Jr. is a ghost that shows up and is intimidating her and following her around the house.
It's very strange.
It feels very
non-consenty.
That's
Yeah.
a great way to put it.
It's very strange, and all of that is then
You add the Y at the end, it makes it cute.
Yeah.
and then all of that is broken up with a bunch of celebrity
This
cameos.
is the third part.
So
Right.
those are because Reitman knew all those people, and as a favor, just got them to be
Chevy
there.
Chase, he just shows up, starts singing some lyrics. Oh, Jeffrey Tambor singing some lyrics. John Candy. See, the John Candy thing I was
That
okay
makes
with,
sense. That one
because
is
that's
there's
little
a
deep
connection,
cut, and it
But
shows he was
Chevy
okay.
Chase?
We also
Danny DeVito.
That's right.
I didn't know the Penguin was in Ghostbusters.
we like there's a bunch of cameos in the first Ghostbusters movie as well of like celebrities playing themselves, like news broadcasters, like Larry
right.
King
Yes,
and
Larry
Casey
King.
Kasem are
What was the guy in the second one? Ben Stein, but he
yes,
was like
Ben Stein is
he was just a
there.
bit part.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so like it's those
Yeah.
and so yeah, I think it's you're Ivan Reitman, you're coming off the heels of Stripes and Meatballs and like yeah, you're in LA. It's also one of those things where like if you've ever been to, was it Universal that they or no Columbia that they like
First?
yeah, like
Columbia made it.
wherever like whatever the studio was they were shooting it at.
Yeah.
There's probably like 1,000 celebrities there on the day.
Oh, for sure.
And
For
it's
sure.
just like lunch and it's like, hey, do you want to come and be in a music video? Like,
Yeah.
you don't need much for that, right? Like they just like show up and do it. Like there's very little, like it's a really
The
loose
Chevy Chase
kinda-
thing were always so I don't watch the music video for this for this song very often.
I haven't
the
seen
song
it in
is-
years. I forgot about it.
It's
Strange.
a fantastic watch once in a while. But the Chevy Chase thing always reminds me of Call Me Al.
Sure.
when-
Yeah,
'cause he was,
absolutely.
like, the
With Paul
central-
Simon.
Paul Simon.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, as famous as this song was and is,
Yeah, number
The
one
two
on the
of
number one on the
you-
Billboard charts.
Yes.
Number 2 and all that.
Yeah.
the two of you actually prefer a remix of
So
this song.
so this is really funny. We're talking about, of course, Neil Cicerega's remix of the song "Bustin'," but as funny as it sounds, this genuinely did cause like a resurfacing, and like it made a whole new generation of people hear this song and talk about
And-
Ghostbusters for the first time in a
it's,
really long
it's
time.
a remix, and it's a comedic remix because it's like a mashup, but there's no other song with it.
Yeah.
Really, it's its own song, but he's recut the lyrics to make them a little dirtier,
A little goofier, a
a
little
little
silly.
goofier, and so like that in and of itself is a great art because he also makes it still a really good song, and in fact it's a little bit more like danceable,
Yeah.
and like a little bit more danceable, a little bit more modern.
What's the artist name again?
Neil
Neil Cicereg. Oh my god! I looked this up yesterday because I didn't want to pronounce his name wrong. Cicereiga.
Cicerega,
I believe.
think.
Okay.
So
he's like an internet guy. He's been doing
Totally.
internet stuff for a super long time.
I'll find a link
Yeah.
to the.
If you've ever, there you go.
And well, because he did a series of albums that were all based off of Smash Mouth samples.
Actually, so the first one
Mouth
is based on,
sounds.
and then the next
And
one,
the next one
is
doesn't.
no,
'cause it's
sorry,
mouth,
no.
mouth silence.
yeah.
Mouth Sounds is the
So
Mouth
he
Sounds.
has a trio of albums: Mouth Sounds, Mouth Silence,
And Mouth
Mouth
Moods.
Moods.
and
He
they're
just
all
put a fourth one out.
oh really?
Yeah, a couple of years
a
ago.
fourth mouth.
Yeah, Mouth Dreams.
They're
I
all
think.
Smash Mouth remixes.
The first one is
Okay.
They're not all. They're mashups, but they're using like, and they're not even mashup. Like he uses like a 1 second clip of stuff. But there's also like there's a whole song based around the guy from Home Improvement going huh? And like
that's the whole song.
that's a great song. And he's done another one where it's the Eye of the Tiger, and this is my favorite song. You know the one I'm talking about?
I have the yes.
It's
Yeah,
the Eye of the Tiger, but he just keeps having the lyrics like it makes them sound super dumb because they just keep saying Eye of the Tiger and rhyming Eye of the Tiger with Eye of the Tiger, and like it just it's wonderful.
He's
So
a very funny person who makes like
yes.
he has made music under the name Lemon Demon for a really long time, which is almost all comedic music, but it's
Okay.
his own original music. And he made this just funny remix, made a video for it. The video has like 17 million views or something like
I know.
that.
So Jeff,
and-
when we were on our way,
To-
you and
to
your
see
partner
Ghostbusters.
and myself to go see Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, you play the song, and it's not that I hate the song or anything, but one of my favorite things about the original, it's like there's this build up until the bustin' makes me feel good.
Yeah.
And this song, I think purposefully, like teases you.
You
and
never get there.
gives it to
You
you.
hear bustin' like
bustin',
150
bustin',
times.
bustin'. And you're just like,
Yeah.
but I want to feel good.
And the very final one, he swaps out Feel Good with Feel Good from Gorillaz.
like feel gooding.
And it's just like it's little comedic things like that. Like
Yeah.
I think it's brilliant. I think
It
it's-
is brilliant.
And
but-
but like so we talked about it a little bit. My inception point for Ghostbusters was the song.
right.
That was the thing I fell in love with as a 3 or 4 year old, and then found out there was a movie. And so I had the tape, and it was one of a few tapes that I had. I had my little Fisher Price tape recorder, and this tape like lived permanently in that.
Amazing.
And like, so if I remember correctly, the tape has like a handful of songs that are in the movie. They're very 80s songs. And then there's also the score by, I want to say Elmer Bernstein, which
Deep cut, deep pull.
excellent score. And so, yeah, I remember buying the second soundtrack, and I guess there's like a little kid thing of
There's
like,
the big song in this second movie was "Your Love Lifted Me Higher."
there's that, and there's a Bobby Brown one.
Yeah, we don't.
But yeah. And there's also one Glenn Fry from the Eagles did one that's. But yeah, there's a couple songs, but like again, the aesthetic and the sound of music had changed drastically, and
Yeah.
like there's this like
Yeah.
little kid thing of like with sequels or like other things, you just basically want the exact same thing as the first time, and this was like very different. I remember being disappointed with the second soundtrack
Yeah.
before I was even disappointed with the second movie. Because it wasn't, I was like, I don't know
Yeah.
what I expected. Like I already
Yeah.
had the first tape. What else did I want?
Well, it was
But-
like
I wanted Ray Parker Jr. to do a follow-up banger.
It's like Ghostbusters 2.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Maybe you should write that.
Ghostbusters.
Who are you going to invite to the party? Yeah. Ghostbusters 2.
Yeah. You could rhyme Ghostbusters with most busters. And
most busters can't do what these Ghostbusters can do.
Wait, you've written most of the song.
Hey, hit me up, Ray Parker Jr.
Yeah,
I won't sue you. Maybe
He's still alive.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good.
That's
great.
So that's the show. Thanks everybody for listening. I'll post the deck list as well as links that we've talked about throughout the show in the show notes below. Let us know. Get up in the comments. Let us know if there was anything that you think we missed or got wrong.
How did you find Ghostbusters?
But yeah, let us know if there's any other topics you'd like us to talk about. And of course, if you do enjoy this kind of magic adjacent content, please let us know in the comments below. And if you would like to like and subscribe, if you want to like and subscribe, please like and subscribe.
Do it even if you don't.
Yeah, do it. You know what? It helps us out. Just do it, please. But, do what makes you feel good. Bustin' makes me feel good. Bustin'. Ghostbusters 2.